Good afternoon and welcome to the Brain-Behavior Connection in FASD, Informing Ways to Reach Optimal Potential with Dan Dubovsky. Before we begin, I just want to make participants aware if you or someone in your household is in crisis, please reach out to your local crisis services. We will put SOAR Community Services contact information in the chat. We are thrilled to welcome caregivers, educators, and community partners from across the province and other far places who all play important roles in the lives of those living with FASD. To introduce myself, I am Lindsay Campbell, the lead FASD coordinator here at Contact Brant. I would also like to introduce my colleague Linda McFadden, clinical manager of service coordination. Our emails are also in the chat. I want to thank you all for participating in today's training to expand your own insight, knowledge, and awareness around FASD. I want to thank Contact Brant and Health Nexus who have made this training and future training opportunities possible. In terms of housekeeping, I will go over some brief reminders. Please ensure your mics are turned off during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, I will ask the questions that have been submitted to the chat on your behalf to Dan. We will also send out a recording of today's presentation to the email address you registered with on Eventbrite. At this time, I will kindly ask Linda to lead us in a land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Lindsay. So we are grateful that the land on which we live and work lies on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Neutral. Acknowledging the land is a sign of respect and recognition for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. It also provides an awareness of Indigenous land rights, their beliefs, and honors them as the original occupants of the land. As an organization in the Brant community and as individuals who benefit from living and working on this land, we have a responsibility to continuously educate ourselves and recognize that colonialism is a current and ongoing process. Our work does not start and end with land acknowledgements. We want to recognize and celebrate the Indigenous communities that we have the opportunity to work with and learn from, and also pay our respect to elders, both past and present. So I'll now hand things over to our presenter, Dan Dubovsky, who's coming to us from Pennsylvania, and let him introduce himself, give a little background on how he began his personal and professional journey in the world of FASD. So if you're good to go, Dan, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
You're muted, Dan, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Lindsay, and thank you all for being here. I'm honored to be able to talk with you this afternoon, and again, encourage you to ask questions, make comments, put them in the chat. And I've asked Lindsay and Linda to interrupt me with questions so that we can get to them. I think that that's really important. I know it would be much easier to do that if we were in person, but we will do our best. And I've been involved or interested in FASD now for over 40 years. It really started, well, just my background is as a clinician. I'm a social worker by trade. I've worked in residential treatment centers with children and adolescents and young adults as a direct care staff, and then as a therapist in residential treatment. I've worked in community-based services. I've worked in and supervised social workers in acute care, community-based psychiatric units. I worked in oncology for about 5 years or so, and then worked in training people in the field of mental health and substance use services in the state of Pennsylvania, which is where I live, for 8.5 years. And then for 14 years, I was the FASD specialist with the SAMHSA FASD Center for Excellence in Washington, D.C., until the U.S. government decided in its infinite wisdom to defund the center in 2016. And since then, I've been working on this kind of as an independent person. So as I start my presentation, I will tell you a little bit more about my connection with FASD. So hopefully you can see this with what we are. Oops, let's get this organized here. Oh. So this is my contact information. So if anything comes up after today that I can be helpful with, please feel free to contact me. Note that my name in my email address is spelled correctly on this slide. So my email address is ddubovksy@verizon.net, even though my name is SKY. So if you try to send me an email with my name spelled correctly, I won't get it. Then you'll be pissed off. So, and this is my cell phone number. And I'm happy to talk with anyone and provide whatever support and help that I can. This is the reason I got involved in FASD. This is my son, Bill. And when Bill was about 7 years old, I brought him to a neurologist to try to find out why he was having some of the problems he was having. He didn't do well in school. In education, we often have this, what I think is a really awful concept that kids need to fail at something in order to maybe get what they need. I don't think that's just in terms of school either. I think that's in terms of a lot of things. So when he was ready for first grade, I went to the school and I said, he needs a small class. And they said, well, we'll put him in a regular class. If he doesn't do well there, then we'll talk about a different setup for him. He didn't do well in a class with 30 kids. So they put him in a small special education class. And I really believe that the worst class for a youth with an FASD is a small special education class with acting out kids. Because one of the things is one of the most helpful things in helping somebody with an FASD is modeling and learning by modeling, not by being told what to do or consequence for not doing something, but by modeling. So he was in a class with kids who acted out. He acted out. He modeled the behavior of the other kids in the class. Didn't do well there. Didn't get along with the other kids in the neighborhood. And the clincher for me was that he didn't respond to my amazing parenting techniques. And I figured that just had to be something to do with him. Couldn't possibly be what I was doing. So I brought him to a neurologist, and the neurologist did a neurological exam, and she said, "Does he drink?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. I hope not. He's only 7. Why would you ask me if he drinks?" And she said, "Well, his reflexes are uneven. And usually that's indicative of drug or alcohol use in an individual or in their parents." And that was 1982. There wasn't a lot I could find out about it. For the next 7 years, we really struggled. He gathered diagnoses like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, reactive attachment disorder. None of the approaches really were helpful for him. So he was labeled as being non-compliant, uncooperative, resistant, manipulative, and unmotivated. And it really wasn't until an aunt of mine called me up and she said, "I just read this book and I think you should read it. It's called The Broken Cord." And The Broken Cord was written and published in 1989 by Michael Doris, who talked about his son. And it was the first popular book on FAS. And a lot of people have read that book over the years and said it's so depressing because Michael really only talked about all the problems he had with his son. He didn't talk about the joys. And I read the book and it was incredibly validating because everything he talked about in the book, everything he described with his son, I said, this is Bill. This is Bill. This sounds just like Bill. And Bill at that point was about 15 years old. And it still took 4 years to get a diagnosis for him. So he was diagnosed with FAS when he was 19, which meant 19 years of failing in every system of care. And even after he got his diagnosis, every program he was involved in, I would do in-service training, and they would say, "Oh, we're thinking about maybe this person, but not Bill. He's bright. He knows what he needs to do. He can tell us what he needs to do. He's just non-compliant, uncooperative, resistant, manipulative, and unmotivated." So no program ever understood how FASD affected him because he looked okay. He sounded okay. So I really thank him because he's been my mentor in understanding FASD and what it's like. understanding what not to do as a parent, because I did everything you're not supposed to do, and trying to think differently about behavior, which I think is really the key for FASD, is thinking differently about behaviors and not assuming that behaviors are willful, purposeful behaviors that need to be consequenced, but finding out what's causing a specific behavior for a specific person. The other reason I put a picture of Bill up is because nobody would see him on the street. Nobody would see him in their program and say, this is a young man with this disability. And for the most part, this really is a hidden disability that nobody recognizes. And I realize how painful it is to live with a hidden disability that people don't recognize. To be told over and over again, you're just being lazy. You're just not trying hard enough. You can do it if you want to. You're just being non-compliant, uncooperative, resistant, manipulative, and unmotivated. When Bill got into middle school, he came home one day and he said, Dad, every day I walk into school, I feel stupid. Well, how many of us would put ourselves in a situation where we feel stupid every day? That's just intolerable. So either get thrown out or truant, because you can't do that every day. And one of the ways to deal with the emotional pain of having something that's going on with you that people do not acknowledge is to use substances. And I understand why there are a number of people who have FASD who end up using substances. It's not a good long-term approach, but I understand why, because at least it blocks out some of that pain for the short term. So recognizing all of that, I think, was really important. And Bill got me on a whole different track in my life. And I had to look back at all the people I worked with in treatment and what I did, what I could have done differently, what I could have recognized in some of them, and how I could have responded differently. So I really do thank him because, he changed my thinking. And as I said, specifically, and this is so important in FASD, is thinking about what's causing a behavior and is a behavior brain-based as opposed to behavior-based. So that's been my motivation in the last 40 years, in learning more about this, in understanding it more, and appreciating it more, and appreciating the approach that I'm going to talk about today, which I think we don't do enough. So again, a key question to always ask, and this is for any behavior for anybody. Somebody is doing something, we need to say, what's causing the behavior? So, for example, I would say to Bill, or you could say to anybody, go pick up your dirty clothes, put them in the hamper, fold the clean clothes, and put them away and make your bed. Right? Give him 3 instructions. And he wouldn't do it. And now you could look at somebody who has a true oppositional disorder, somebody has a true ADHD, somebody has a true FASD, and the behavior is exactly the same. You've given them 3 instructions and they haven't done it. And the problem we often have is we see a behavior and then we go to, how do we respond to the behavior? And we really cannot do that without understanding what's causing the behavior. Because for the person with a true oppositional disorder, the cause of that behavior is they don't feel like doing what they know they need to do, because they know the 3 things they need to do. They're in their head, they've taken the information into their brain, stored it properly, and could recall it when they need it. The one with ADHD probably didn't do the 3 things they were supposed to do because they got distracted, but they have the information stored in their brain and can recall it when they need it. But in FASD, the difficulty is often taking the information in, especially verbally, taking multiple instructions, verbal instructions. So if we understand that's why they're not doing what we asked them to do, then if we break it down to 1 step at a time, 1 instruction, and do it with them, they can be very effective. So even though Bill had a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and ADHD and reactive attachment disorder, when I realized this and I broke it down to 1 direction at a time and I did something with it, like, let's go to your room and pick up your clothes, If he was truly oppositional, he would have refused, and he didn't. And then once that was done, I would say, let's fold your clothes, your clean clothes. And then once that, okay, put your socks in this drawer. So when it was broken down that way and I was doing it with him to model, he did really well. So again, what's causing the behavior? Where are they functioning? What are the functional ages? And I'll talk more about that. And that's a plural, that's not a singular. And the other thing for any behavior, the first two questions that should always be asked are, is there something medical that could be causing this behavior? And then the second question is there a substance, a medication or a substance or another substance that could be causing this medication? Those are always supposed to be the first two questions that we ask. I think they're rarely asked, and we rarely think about that because there are medical illnesses that can cause behaviors that look like psychiatric behaviors. There are medications that can cause some of these. We need to know that. And then the next one is there a brain basis for the behavior, meaning how the brain is processing this information? So as I say here, understanding the cause of the behavior really informs how do we respond to this behavior? And that's for anybody. And we don't do it enough. We go from behavior to consequence. And we really need to do something different. So we want to think about not just the chronological age of an individual, but also how are they functioning in a certain area. And we used to talk about like developmental age. And maybe we talk about functional age as if it's just one. Well, this person is 15, but they're developmentally 8. And I've heard that a lot. But that doesn't mean that's not really accurate. So I really like this that the Lakeland Center in Alberta had initially developed, and I added a couple of things to it. And they developed it from Ann Streisguth and Sterling Claren at the University of Washington. But it's like, in general, and again, FASD is absolutely a spectrum. Not everybody with FASD is exactly the same, but this is just a general kind of thing. So looking at an 18-year-old with FASD, where their expressive language may be well above their chronological age, which means that they can speak very well, very clearly, be articulate, but their receptive language, especially verbal receptive language, is often really impaired. And that's due to the effects of alcohol on that developing brain. So the problem is that if they can talk a good game or can tell you what they need to do, then obviously if they don't do it, but you've told them, it's because they don't want to. And that gets into this view that they're just being oppositional, for example. But recognizing that so much of what we do and every part of life is based on verbal receptive language processing skills. And I might have a slide about that, but our entire systems, all of our systems are based on verbal receptive language processing skills. And if we're only taking in every third or fourth word that somebody says, then we're trying to figure out what the person said, what the person means, and then guessing at that. And when it comes to things like sitting in a classroom where a teacher is talking a lot and they're only getting every third or fourth word, often their guesses may be wrong, and then they're going to be seen as purposeful in not doing what they're told to do. Their reading ability may be at, a 16-year-old level, but comprehension may only be at a 6-year-old level. So the idea of reading a story and then telling what the story means may be difficult for them. Now, there's another piece in here that, for example, like reading and then being able to write something down, because often there are fine and gross motor coordination issues, again, due to the impact of the prenatal alcohol, which cause difficulty in things like writing and handwriting. And Bill had difficulty with kind of verbal perceptual difficulty. So he could not take something that was written on a blackboard in class and write it down on a piece of paper and get it right, or even from one page to another and get it right. And it wasn't because he was lazy. Um, so I remember working with a family where the youngster in school really liked to read. He really enjoyed reading. And in his English class, the requirement is they needed to read a book and then they needed to write a couple of paragraphs about the book in their notebook. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do that writing. So we had a meeting and I asked the teacher, I said, could he dictate to his father and have his father write it? And she said, no, he has to write it in his notebook. Could we get like a voice activated computer program? One of those like Dragon Speaks is, I think, an older one, but where it can learn somebody's speech and then they can talk into the computer. No, he has to write it down. And he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. He loved to read the books and he read the books and he could tell you about them, but he couldn't write it down. And Bill had neuropsychological testing done when he was 12 years old. And I still remember that the neuropsychologist said, never expect him to do expository writing. Never expect him to be able to just write down a story. He can tell it, but he can't write it down. So all through school, he kept on failing in places where he was expected to write things down because they didn't think that that was true. They thought that he was just being lazy. Because things like abstract thinking are really impacted by prenatal alcohol, often for some people with FASD, there's difficulty with the concept of money and time because those are abstract concepts. So that may be at an 8-year-old level as opposed to their 18. But if you have a difficulty with the concept of historical time and future time, first of all, you don't get reward and consequence. You have no idea why you're being consequenced for something that happened yesterday or 2 days ago. And when I would consequence Bill for a week at a time, he would come down 15 minutes later and ask to go out. And I would, of course, yell at him. This was before he got his diagnosis. It still wasn't the right thing to do, but I would yell at him. You know why why you're punished, and you know how long you're grounded. And then he would look at me and say, "But I was good just now." And it felt so manipulative, but he was absolutely right. And he didn't understand because 15 minutes was like all day. He thought he went through however long he needed to be consequenced. Um, and then you're often late. You may be late for appointments. And then people think that you're not interested, but it may be the concept of how long does it take to get somewhere and when do you have to leave in order to get somewhere on time. And also, if you don't get the concept of time and maybe it's at an 8-year-old level, then you're also changing your story. So people are often seen as lying because they keep changing when something happened or where it happened or exactly who was involved. And they're seen as lying, but it really is their remembrance of what happened at that time. And then with money, there are some where if you have money in your hand, you can spend it, because the idea that you have to keep it for next week to pay your rent or 3 weeks later for food. No, but I have it now. I can spend it. And I know Bill, for example, was very generous. And if he had money and somebody needed money, he would give it to them or lend it to them. And then miss the idea, then he wouldn't have money. And the view from others was, well, then he'll learn to save his money. And that doesn't work. Physically, they may be consistent with their chronological age, but emotional maturity may be much lower. Social skills, which are very abstract, reading nonverbal cues, body language is really tough, may be much lower. And daily living skills may be a little bit better because with a lot of consistency and support and routine, you can get into that. But recognizing it's not just what's this person's functional age, but how are they functioning in this area? And then how do we help them based on that, where the functioning is, to help support building on that, not treat them like that. So if the comprehension is at a 6-year-old level, you're not going to treat the person like a 6-year-old. You're going to treat the person like an 18-year-old, but recognize that the comprehension is really different. And how do you help recognize that and build on that? But I hear a lot, well, she's 18 years old. This is what she should be doing. This is what we expect of her. So my bias is that we are, unfortunately, I think in all of our countries, as far as I know, we are a problem-based society. We focus on problems. Professionals get paid for dealing with problems and trying to help ameliorate problems. And I think we have to shift that, because I think that especially those with FASD have heard over and over and over and over again what they've done wrong, and have rarely heard what they've done right. So I did some consulting with a residential substance use treatment program for women, and two of the women had screened as having a probable FASD. And this is a program I've been working with now for about 10 years. And it was I was there for a clinical staff meeting, and they wanted me to give them some ideas about how best to work with them. And they brought each of these women up, and they were both in their 20s, mid to late 20s, individually, and they introduced me to them. And the first question I asked each of them was, what do you do well? And neither of them could answer the question. And if I had asked them what their problems were, they could have rattled them off in a minute. But that just speaks to how much we're focused on talking about problem behaviors, and you've done this and you've done that, and not nearly enough about what you've done well. And I think we're moving more in that direction, not as fast or as much as I would like to see, but we're moving there slowly in some places. I don't think in the United States these days, but in other places. So one of the things I say is that part of what I call a positive focus system is really beginning by identifying strengths and abilities. That means every single meeting, I don't care what kind of meeting it is. I don't care if it's a crisis meeting or a hospitalization meeting or it's a discharge meeting or whatever it is. Every meeting should start by talking about strengths in the person, in the family, with who family is, in providers, service providers, and in the community. And we want to build on those strengths and abilities, because our goal is to build self-esteem and competence. And we can't do that if we don't build on strengths and abilities. And I tell family members, and I tell professionals and teachers when they'll listen to me, I'll say things like, I want you to tell this person 5 times a day what they're doing well, what they're doing right, what they're good at, and write down everything you tell them. And the reason to write it down is because when things aren't going well, we forget anything positive that's ever happened. And that's when you take out the papers about what's gone right. But let's start telling people what they're doing well. And there are some people, because if you only hear what you've done wrong, then you believe that you're just bad. And then you start reinforcing that as your self-image. And you kind of sabotage anything positive that anybody says. So I remember working with people these youngsters who would keep screwing up. And I would try to find something that they've done, and then I would absolutely pour on the praise. That's the best thing you've ever done. That is such a wonderful thing. And then within 5 minutes, they're screwing up again. And what I know is that tells me that positive reinforcement, or that positive, doesn't fit with their self-image. and that we need to work really hard at breaking down that negative self-image, which might have developed over years of being told how they've messed up and what they've done wrong and what they could do differently and what they could do better if they tried. So I think we should anybody who's involved with somebody, is tell them what they've done well. We always like to hear what we've done right. Well, let's start telling them routinely. It's pointing out small accomplishments, maybe. And it doesn't mean we ignore challenging behaviors, but we focus on the positives. And a number of years ago, I was doing a training for an agency, and one of the workers had a 14-year-old son with FASD. And she talked about how her son was angry all the time, very sullen, never smiled, wouldn't eat with the family, wouldn't have anything to do with the rest of the family. And I talked about this whole idea, and she sent me an email the next morning. And she said, I went home after the training and I went up to my son and I said, I just want to thank you for all the help you've given your younger brother the last few weeks. I really appreciate that. And she said for the first time in months, he smiled. They had dinner together. They had a really nice evening. And it was just, instead of being home and saying, what happened in school today, or I got this call from school, or this, you did this, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do your chores. She just started with a positive. And for this youngster, it just made a world of difference. So I think we need to do more of that than we do. We need to look at, for those who work at agencies, look at policies and procedures, because so many of them are so negatively focused. If it's a residential program, especially if they get like a manual or a client handbook. I have seen programs where somebody comes into the program and they give them the manual, which is like 100 pages. Here, read this so you know what we're all about. Oh yeah, that's going to go over really well. Wouldn't go over really well for me, that's for sure. But I find that some of those client handbooks, they're so negative, and the rules are things like, there was one program I worked with that had 63 rules and 58 consequences for negative behaviors. And that was given to everybody who came into the program. And I said, 63, nobody in the world could follow 63 rules. And every rule is connected with a negative response. You break this rule, here's the result. And I went through every single rule with them. And I asked them why they had the rule. And some of the rules, they said, those were in place before I got here. I said, then you need to find out why you have the rule. One of the rules was, and this was a residential program, one of the rules was that there were no weapons allowed on the grounds. And I didn't say that's a good rule. I said, why do you have that rule? And they said, because we want people to feel safe while they're here. And I said, do you tell them that? And they thought about it. No, we tell them what the rule is. Think about it. Think about how many times as parents, when we have rules of the house, and I'll show you the rules that I had, if in school we have rules, in other places, how often do we explain why we have a rule? Often we say, here's the rule, here's what happens if you break the rule. And I think for any rule we have to talk about why we have the rule. And if you can't come up with why you have the rule, we shouldn't have the rule. And then there was this program that had an outpatient treatment program. And they had an absence policy. And the absence policy said that if you have, I can't remember, it was four excused absences. After 4 excused absences, which means you called and canceled your appointment ahead of time. After 4 excused absences, you're discharged from outpatient treatment. After 1 unexcused absence, which means you did not call to cancel your appointment and didn't show up, you get an extra week of treatment. After 2 unexcused absences, you get 2 extra weeks of treatment. And after 3 unexcused absences, you get discharged from treatment. Now, this was handed to everybody who came in to outpatient treatment. This was their policy. And I read the policy and I said, my first response was, so you believe that treatment is a punishment for people, right? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you're saying you don't show up for treatment, we're going to give you more. You don't show up for more treatment, we'll give you more. We'll show you. They said, no, 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 that's not what we think. So we talked about it, and I talked about how negative it was. And they actually rewrote their policy. And their new policy is an attendance policy. And it starts out, and again, this is an outpatient substance use treatment program. So their new policy starts out with their first statement is, our goal is to help you live a happy, healthy life free from substances. What a nice way to start a policy. I really liked that. I thought that was great. Then it goes on to say, if you are not able to make an appointment, we would appreciate it if you would call us and let us know so that we know that you're okay. If you miss a certain amount of treatment, we will talk with you about whether it would be helpful to extend your treatment so that you can get the full benefit of what we have to offer. So it was addressing the same issues, but from such a more positive point of view. And I can see going into a program and getting that, I would feel much better than getting the absence policy. So being aware of those things, looking at those things, I think is another really important component of what I call a positive focus system. Now, at first I said it was a positive reinforcement system. And then I had somebody tell me they use positive reinforcement. They'll say to somebody, if you do your chores, we can go to McDonald's. No. If you start a sentence with if or when, or you have a when then you're setting up a reward and consequence. And that's not beneficial. So the first step is helping people identify their strengths. And sometimes, as with these two young women, they can't identify their strengths. Now, what I did in that case was I went to every one of the clinical staff that was at the meeting and I said, what are her strengths? What does she do well? And luckily, they all responded. They could have not, and then I would have been in trouble, but they did respond. So sometimes people can't identify their strengths. Sometimes their strengths get them into difficulty. But how can we look at them as strengths? So we really need to work on that. And I was working with the state of Michigan in the States to identify youth who come through public mental health who have a probable FASD and then to intervene differently. So we developed a protocol for identifying people, for doing a screen and an assessment, and then intervening with, there are a couple of different approaches that we're using. The strengths and strategies approach, which is what I developed, and families moving forward, which Heather Carmichael Olson in Washington State developed. So those were the choices that they're using. And then I realized once we started, I said, we're missing something. And what I realized we were missing was the strengths piece. So I developed a strengths assessment. And the strengths assessment asks a lot of questions for the individual, for the family, for the providers, for the community, in terms of what are strengths? And, who is kin for this person? Who are the most important people? Who helps them calm down when they get upset? Who provides love to them? Who do they love? I mean, those kinds of things are some of the questions that I ask in the strength that we ask in the strengths assessment, because we want to get to that. We want to get to identify what do they like to do? What do they enjoy? What do they feel they do well? What would they like to do if they could? Those kinds of things are really important to look to build this concept to help them identify the strengths that they have. Because sometimes people, you're here, and that's a positive. You're here talking with me, and that's great. And that shows that you're really, you want that support. So again, then we need to build on strengths and abilities. So again, I think we do lip service to strengths. I remember in Pennsylvania where I live, there was the Department of Education and the Department of Mental Health got together and they developed a protocol to look at an ideal family meeting with the school, and they made a video of it. And the video was about this. I think he was like a 14-year-old or 15-year-old, and in the room for this video ideal meeting was the mother of the kid and I think 7 people from the school and the mental health service. And they started the meeting by saying the teacher said, "Well, Mrs. So and so, it's really been a pleasure having Johnny in my class for the last 3 weeks." That was the only sort of positive thing that was said. And then they kept on telling the mother what she had to do. And they thought that was an ideal meeting. And I thought it was a terrible meeting. But they thought that was identifying strengths, and it's not. So we need to spend time on focusing on strengths. It's not something that we can do quickly. And that's why I said that that's why I developed the strengths assessment, because yeah, we have to think about it. We have to ask those questions. You don't hand it to somebody to fill out. You talk with them about that in asking the questions. So that's really important. And again, we can't figure out how to best address challenging behaviors if we don't know the person's strengths and abilities and the abilities of those around them to support them. So again, strengths assessment needs to be face-to-face. If it's an older child or an adolescent, it should be done separately with the adolescent or adult, and then separately with caregivers, and not together. We can talk about it together afterwards, but you don't do the assessment together because then we may not get honest responses. And we want to know, what does the individual see as the strengths in themselves, and who in the family, and who's kin in the family, who are the important people to them. And that may be very different from what the family thinks. That's important to know, or whoever the caregivers are. There's an example of this that was done with a residential treatment center, actually, where they did the strengths assessment with staff and with an adolescent. And the adolescent thought that the staff saw nothing positive about them. And having the staff do the strengths assessment, and they have to think, then being able to talk with the youth about it and what the staff saw as his strengths and abilities made a great impression. And I view the strengths assessment as not something you do once and stick in a chart somewhere or put on a shelf, but it's a dynamic document that we're always adding to. And we may change because people may change in terms of who's around them and who's kin. And kin is not necessarily nuclear family. Kin may be friends, kin may be others. But who is kin for this individual, and who is kin for the family, and who are the supports for the family? So that's a dynamic document because that's going to change as people meet other people. And we want to keep looking at it, and we want to keep building on it. So again, strengthen the individual, the family, the providers, and the community. And what I see is that a long time ago, especially in communities with a lot of rich cultural traditions, is that people who were different were still part of the community and incorporated into those rich cultural traditions. And I think maybe as we become more westernized or more technology focused, people who are different get ostracized more frequently. So one of the important things is, are there rituals and traditions that the person can feel part of in the community? And I remember at one point working with a residential treatment center in Utah that had a lot of youth from Alaska. And this one youth who interestingly would pretend to be a dog sometimes. And I would raise the question as to whether in his village, did the sled dogs get more attention than kids did, which is a possibility. But the other thing was that he really liked carving, but of course they wouldn't give him anything sharp. But before he was discharged, I said to the clinical person, I said, can you talk with people in the village to see, is there somebody who is a carver who would be willing to take him on as an apprentice? I think we've lost a lot of apprentice type programs. Bill used to say, how do I know what I want to do if I haven't done it? Which I thought made a lot of sense. It's like, how do you know whether you like doing this kind of job unless you've done it? So I think sometimes apprentice type programs could be really useful. So, again, are there strengths in the community? If they really like music or dance or art, are there programs in the community that they can be part of instead of ostracized from the community? And they can feel a part of something that's really positive. And I'll tell you that in 25 years of dealing with Bill, nobody ever asked me these questions of what does he do well? What do I like about him? What are his best qualities? One of my favorite questions to ask families is, what's been your funniest experience with this person? Because I think that that's really important to get to as well. And I'll tell you that as a therapist early on, I rarely ask these questions because we were always dealing with problems and how to deal with the problem behaviors. So again, that's the shift when we use a real, true strength-based approach. So again, everybody with FASD is different, but I do see a lot of these things over and over again. Being very friendly, very likable, very verbal, and really wanting to be helpful. And often they get them into difficulty because if you can't identify dangerous people in dangerous situations, these things can get you into difficulty. But if we recognize them as strengths, and let's say there's a youngster in school who is talking all the time, interrupting constantly, really likes to be helpful, very friendly. Maybe the teacher can use that youngster to help get the class together for group activities. Well, no, she has to sit quietly and do her work and raise her hand when she's supposed to and wait to be called on in order to get that because that's a privilege. No, if you set it up that way, don't do it. It needs to be part of her day. Or maybe a youngster like that could be the tour guide for visitors who come to the school, or maybe help new kids who come to the class, or new adults who come into the program to feel comfortable. But recognizing if that's a strength. And I think especially the helpful piece. I know, again, for Bill, if I said to Bill, go out and mow the lawn or you will be grounded, 10 years later, he would still be grounded and the lawn would not be mowed. If I said to him, Bill, I need help mowing the lawn, would you mind helping me? In 10 minutes, he'd be out mowing the lawn. And the problem is sometimes we as adults get caught up in they have to do what we tell them to do, when we tell them to do it, the way we tell them to do it. And what I say is, because I see this over and over again in FASD, this incredible strength of wanting to be helpful. Ask the person to help with something. Instead of tell them to do something, ask them to help. When Bill was in residential treatment for several years, and he was on level 0 for almost the entire time he was there. And, they would say, they would tell Bill, if you want your points, your job is to clear the tables after dinner tomorrow. And the next day came, of course, every day's a new day. So he had no idea what he was supposed to do. He wasn't there after dinner. He didn't clear the tables. He got no points. And the staff would say, but if let's say it's Tuesday and the person who was supposed to clear the tables isn't around and Bill's around and we ask him to help, he's more than happy to help. But because he doesn't do it Wednesday when he's scheduled, he gets no points. And I said, well, then why don't you, when it's Wednesday and they're at dinner, say, Bill, we need help clearing the tables after dinner. Would you mind helping? Then he would do it. No, he's an adult. He has to learn responsibility. If he's really motivated, then he'll be there and clear the tables. If he really wants his points, he'll be there and clear the tables. It's like, and we don't get it. We really don't get it. There was after he was there for about 3 or 4 months, I said to the staff, I said, I've been invited to present at a conference at a resort, and I want to take Bill with me. And they said, well, he has to be on level 1 to go off the grounds. And I said, okay, well, you have 2 months to get him on level 1. I was the parent from hell. Nobody wanted to deal with me because I thought that was their role. They needed to get him on level 1. Not he needed to get on level 1. They needed to get him on level 1. So 2 months goes by. I call the social worker and I say, okay, I just want to make sure I'm going to pick Bill up tomorrow. Well, he's still on level 0. He can't leave the grounds. I said, sorry. I told you I was taking him on this trip. You had 2 months to get him on level 1, and I made the arrangements and I can't cancel them. So they said, well, okay, if you give him all the points for the 3 days he's with you, he'll have enough points for level 1. I said, okay. So we went to this thing, and of course he did his little things that he wasn't where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. Nothing major, but he did some, minor things. We get back and they said, how was Bill? He was great. He got all of his points. And they said, Bill, that's great. You just learned you're on level 1. And he felt so good. For the next month, he did everything he was supposed to do. And then they said, Bill, you're doing really well, but it hasn't been long enough yet to move up to the next level. And he got discouraged. And then for the next 2 years, he was on level 0. But the difference between, again, using these strengths and ignoring them made a tremendous difference. Very caring, worried about other people, no idea how their words or actions may affect somebody else, because that's abstract, but always worried, how are you doing today? Are you okay? You need some water? Is everything okay? Very hard workers, often doing the wrong thing, but working really hard at it. So if we can get employers to understand what they need in terms of support, they can be great workers and always be there and always be on time. And that's, but we need to recognize that with the right supports. Many people I've known with FASD are very creative. Music, art, dance, poetry, videos. And we used to see this in the Vancouver conference at the end every year. And I would always tell people, if you can get to that conference, one conference, go to that conference, and you must stay until the end of the conference to see the incredible things that people with FASD can do, because of course they always put on the closing session. Really important, very creative. Well, let's tap into that, but don't use it as a reward for good behavior and take it away for bad behavior. Very determined, which is a strength-based way of saying stubborn, but will get rejected and go back and try again. Get rejected, go back and try again. Bill would get beaten up and go right back to the same friends. Not what I would like to see, but very determined. And long after we would just give up. I think the points of insight are helping people with FASD understand how their brain works best. So the idea of, if you try hard enough, you will remember 3 verbal instructions that somebody gives you, is just setting them up for failure and for frustration, because the brain may not work that way. But understanding that because of the way everybody's brain works differently, it has nothing to do with how smart somebody is, but the way your brain works, it's important to just get one step at a time, one direction at a time. Just tell me the first thing I need to do, and maybe write it down. And if there's more than one, write them down and check them off as you do them. I mean, those are points of insight in helping them understand that. It can be really, really useful. Many with FASD are very, very good with little kids. Many of them are good with the elderly. Many of them are good with people with physical disabilities, and often not good with their peers if their peers don't have FASD, because their peers remind them that they're different. But if they are good with little kids, and the asterisk is because some people may have sexually inappropriate behaviors, often they are either, again, functioning at a much younger age in that area, or they're misreading cues, but the majority don't. So if they are, maybe this youngster in school could read to kids in the kindergarten every day for a certain amount of time, or help out in the library or something. Or if they are good with the elderly, maybe help out at a nursing facility, or if they're good with people with physical disabilities. So again, if that's a strength, let's recognize that and tap into it. They tend not to be malicious in what they do. Even those with FASD who have done some things that are not very good, they're not, it's not the same maliciousness that we may see from somebody with kind of, who's more willful and purposeful in their behavior. So at one point, Bill was planning on killing me. I thought he was going to kill me. My family thought he was going to kill me. I was worried that if he killed me, there'd be nobody to take care of him. And what happened was he came to me one day and he said, "Dad, how much life insurance do you have?" And by that time, I understood FASD a little bit. So I said, "None, Bill. I have no life insurance." So he said, "Oh, okay." And then a couple of weeks later, we got into an argument and I went to get in my car and he came out of the house and he said, "I hope you drive your car into a tree and kill yourself, because at least then I'll get the house and everything in it." Now you have to understand at the same time, he wanted to live with me and spend 7 days a week, 24 hours a day with me. So I ran up to him and I said, "Oh no, I won't, Bill. If I don't die of old age, if I don't die of natural causes, you get nothing. You don't get the house. You don't get anything in the house. So you better hope I die of old age," because I knew he didn't know what natural causes meant. And he said, "Oh, okay." And then he gave up trying to kill me. Now, did he want to kill me because he hated me? No. Did he want to kill me because he thought I was a terrible parent? Nah. 10 years earlier, I might have said yes, but not at that point. He got the idea of killing me from television, where he saw some programs where parents died and they inherited all this money. And money equals power and control, and having no money means you have no power and no control. So he thought, if I kill my dad, I get all this money. Now, did he think, if I kill my dad, I'll get this money, I'll run away, nobody will find me, and I'll be able to have all this money? No. And if he had actually killed me, he would have been surprised that I wasn't there to take care of him, because he didn't think through to the consequences, because that's an abstract concept. And when abstract thinking is impaired, you don't think through to the end of the consequences. So it was a bit premeditated, but it was not malicious. He didn't want to hurt me. He really didn't. He just wanted money. So there really is a different quality. And every day is a new day, which the good thing is that what I find is that people with FASD don't hold a grudge. So they can be furious with you 1 minute, and the next minute they want a hug from you. They can curse you and yell at you, and 5 minutes later they want a hug. They can get into a fight with a peer, and 10 minutes later they want to play with their peer and have no idea why the peer won't play with them. But for them, every day's a new day. And that's what I see that as a strength, that not holding that kind of grudge. So I put strategies in different areas because people like to talk about things like executive functioning and other area and social functioning. So I kind of did it this way to some extent. So in terms of strategies, one is reducing stimuli in the environment. We tend to think more is better. The more we have, the better. And Bill had 3 dressers in his room filled with clothes, lots and lots of toys and things when he was younger. And he wore the same clothes day after day after day. Way overwhelming. way overstimulating. And my recommendation is always a bed, a desk, a chair, 1 to 2 pictures on the wall, 3 days worth of clothes maybe that they pick out as they get older, and 2 to 3 things to have out if they're younger to play with, or if they're older to have out. And everything else is put away as a support, not as a punishment. And this is not for everybody, but this is for those who get overstimulated by too much there. So this is for those where they keep their area a mess all the time. And they're always getting into difficulty because their area is a mess. And often it's just there's too much stuff. There's too much. So, and then what I always say is everything else is put away, as I said, as a support. You know, it's really hard for a lot of people to keep their area clean with lots and lots of stuff in it. So why don't you pick out the 3 things you want to have out? Let's pick out your clothes for the next few days. And we'll put all of this away in the closet. And if you want something that's put away, you don't have to earn it. We'll just trade it for something that's out. Not a problem. So, and then in school, classrooms are often way overstimulating, way too much on the walls and the noises, and the door to the classroom's open, so they hear everything in the hallway, and there are pictures all over the place and noises all over. And then we wonder why they may be like crawling under their desk or acting out. So when we can reduce the stimuli, that could be really helpful. Softer lighting, softer colors, softer sounds, because of a lot of the sensory issues. So fluorescent lights are often really tough. People hear the buzzing in the lights, they see the flickering in the lights are too bright. But often, especially as a younger child, they can't articulate that that's what's bothering them. So in the classroom, which almost always has fluorescent lights because they're cheaper, you see this kid crawling under their desk, putting their head down, getting up out of their seat, turning the light switch on and off, running out of the room, running around the room, and they're just seen as disruptive. And again, nobody stops to say, what's causing the behavior? Could it be the lights? So avoiding fluorescent lights is a good thing. If there have to be fluorescent lights, maybe softer lighting. There are diffusers for fluorescent lights. There are dimmers for fluorescent lights. There are ways to get around it. Bright colors are often, again, overstimulating. So we want to, again, softer colors. At one point, I was doing some consulting with a program that had bought a building and was turning it into a residential treatment center. And they had a design team that they hired, and they wanted to do like bright accent walls in the bedrooms. And I said, let's talk about that color scheme. And how about softer colors? And they ended up with like also a certain color that ran along the wall from the rooms to like the cafeteria. So if they had to go to the cafeteria, they could follow that line. But they did end up with softer colors. Softer sounds, even though somebody may make a lot of noise, loud sounds are really bothering. Being consistent in appointment days and times. Because again, the difficulty with, and talking about how long does it take to get to the appointment? How will you get there? And not assuming that if they don't show up, it's willful that they don't want to be there. And I remember doing some work again with, this was a justice program, juvenile justice program. And it was the young woman who kept on getting into minor problems. And every time she got into minor problems, she ended up in the local detention center. And she would call her mother, and her mother would promise to come and visit her on visiting day. And then visiting day would come around the next week, and her mother wouldn't show up. And then this young woman would act out. And basically the staff were saying when I got there that this mother was sabotaging things for the daughter, setting the daughter up to act out. And I was listening to them, and this daughter had a diagnosis of FASD. And I was saying, I wonder about her mother. because her mother isn't telling her daughter she won't come and visit. She's telling her daughter she will come and visit. But then it's a week later. So what if you talk with the mother about, now, how will you get here on visiting day? Would it be helpful if we arrange to come and pick you up? Would it be helpful if we call you with a reminder the day before? And maybe about 15 minutes before we're going to be there to pick you up so that we know where you are and you can tell us where you are, so where you need to be picked up and what time it is. Because it's hard to remember all of those things, because her mother might well have had FASD as well. And again, not just assuming that this mother was purposefully promising to see her daughter and not showing up, because it didn't sound like that. So again, thinking about that in terms of being consistent, and the more consistent we can be, the better. They do better if they're being seen in treatment a little bit, short times and more frequent. The best therapist Bill had was a psychiatrist who would see him for 15 minutes a day. And if it can't be in person, it may be touching base by phone. I'm just going to check in with you every morning at 9:30 for 5 minutes. And if it's somebody who likes to talk a lot, it might be, I'd love to talk longer, but I have a lot of people I need to check in with. So when we get on the phone, I'm going to set the timer. So when the timer goes off, I know that it's time we have to say goodbye. Because if you just talk with a person and then say, oh, I'm really sorry, I have to go, then often a person may feel that you don't want to talk with them. You don't like them. And that's not the issue in this case. So it may be touching base by phone 4 days a week and then seeing them in person once a week. That's the ideal. Now, if Bill were seen once a week, he could talk for an hour, but it wasn't going to help in terms of his treatment. Because if every day is a new day, every week is like a new month. So again, touching base every day for a little bit, seeing them for 15 minutes rather than an hour, may be more useful. Plan early and often for any changes in routine. Try to keep routines scheduled as much as possible. And if there's going to be a change, prepare the person early and often. Because surprising somebody with FASD, even if it's a positive thing, can increase anxiety. And we know that can increase the release of cortisol. And that's not a good thing. So we want to avoid that. So we want to prepare them for changes. If there's going to be, if this is let's say it's a youngster in school and they always act out when there's a substitute teacher, then when there's going to be a substitute teacher, you have somebody meet this youngster at the door to school who the youngster likes. It could be a janitor. It could be a PE teacher. It could be the vice principal, whoever it is. And sit down with the youngster for 5 minutes and go over it. Now, you're going to have a different teacher today. Here are the things that are going to be the same. And there may be some things different because it's a different person. And if you are worried about anything, you come in and see me, or you come and see the vice principal, whatever it is that's been arranged. And then you've let the substitute teacher know, if this youngster wants to come and see me or the vice principal, let them come and see me. That can avoid huge outbursts in the classroom. And that's preparing them for change, because you don't want to spring something on them. Role playing, because the area of the brain that's responsible for recognizing dangerous people and dangerous situations is often impacted by prenatal alcohol. So the person may not recognize dangerous people and dangerous situations. And then we want to, let's role play different situations that may be risky for how we would like them to respond. And then we role play that more than once, because we know that immediate working memory is often impaired. So lots of repetition is really useful. It's helpful. But role playing those situations can be really helpful in terms of what to do. And, I really see that for many people with FASD, that not everybody, because it's spectrum, but that the goal as they get older may be anytime you're not sure about something, anytime you have a question about anything, you call me. And if I'm not around, you call this person. And it's two people who they feel really comfortable with. It may be family members. It may be a provider, a treatment person. It may be a close friend who's a trustworthy person. But again, being able to, rather than when you need to figure this out on your own, or you need to do all this on your own, because that's the real world, which I heard from behavior specialists before. They need to figure this out on their own because that's the real world, and they need to do everything on their own. I said, that's setting the person up to fail. If we can build in any time you're not sure about something, you call and check, because it's really hard to figure all this out. And this is especially true when it comes to things like social media, where if you really are naive and gullible, if you are, don't recognize danger signs, and you meet somebody online who is actually not who you think they are and not who they pretend to be, because they're pretending to be a 14-year-old boy and they're really not, but that's who they're pretending to be. And they send you pictures of a 14-year-old boy. And then they want you to sneak out of the house and meet them in the park at night. Again, it's that piece about if we can get to the point where they feel comfortable, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And if we can do that and you feel comfortable, it's really important. Actually asking questions is a sign of strength. Some people think it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And I remember we're talking with some people who were working in Alaska with a family where the mother in the family had FASD, and she had two children, both with FASD, and she loved her kids, and she wanted to be a good parent. And this agency had been working with her for a long time. And there were two people at the agency who worked with her, who she felt really comfortable with. And they said to her, anytime you have a question, you call me, her primary person. And if I'm not available, you call her, and you know both of us and you feel comfortable with us. And she would call sometimes and say, it's 40 below. What coat should I give my son to wear? And they would say, well, what do you think? And most of the time, 98% of the time, she got it right. They did not say, well, you don't have to call us about that anymore. That would have been a mistake. Good, I agree with you. I think that's a good choice for what coat to give him away. My daughter came home with her math homework. I don't understand it. What do I do? So because they had that relationship and she felt comfortable asking those questions, she kept her kids at home. They were doing really well. They weren't in foster care. They weren't moved from home to home. And again, it's just that piece about, I don't know that any of us can be independent and not count on anybody and make all decisions on their own without talking with somebody. But we seem to think that for people who have some struggles, that's what they're supposed to do. And I really think building that sense of dependency, which is a good thing, not a bad thing, so that they know who they can go to and they know who they can count on when they need help or when they have a question. To me, that's a goal. And that's what we want to build in. There was another example of a young woman who was in substance use treatment, and she graduated from treatment and she went to get an apartment. She got her apartment and she came back to talk with her therapist and told her therapist that she was having sex with the landlord because the landlord told her that if she didn't have sex with him, that she would get evicted. And she said, I wasn't sure, but I don't want to lose my apartment. And again, if we had been able to convince her, anytime you're not sure about something, you call, and let's figure that out together. That, to me, is a goal. Again, we want to tell them repeatedly what they're doing right. If there is a consequence for something, the only consequence that may be useful is one that's immediate, short-term, and connected with what occurred. And that's really a key issue there. It's like, a consequence for, like, again, this other residential program. There was a young woman in the program who, when she got mad, she would kick holes in the walls. And the consequence was she couldn't go to a dance 2 weeks later. And she had no idea in the world why she couldn't go to the dance. Because she was good that day of the dance. She had no idea. And I said, maybe a better approach is, if she kicks a hole in the wall, she has to fix the wall. So you have to get the maintenance person to meet with her and go over what materials are needed to fix the wall. And maybe take her to the hardware store to get the materials if they aren't there on the grounds. And then help her, model with her, fixing the hole in the wall. And the initial response was, no, that's rewarding bad behavior. I said, no. And she's going to miss out on some fun things while she's fixing the wall, the hole in the wall, but it's going to be because she's busy fixing the hole in the wall. And once the wall is fixed, then her consequence is over. If you want her to pay back the money that it cost, then you might give her a job and talk with her about how much of her earnings are going to go towards paying back and track of that. But don't take $1 out of her allowance every week for the next 6 months, because then she'll think you're stealing her money. And what happened with this young woman is, by the time she left residential treatment, the staff said, she is a whiz at fixing holes in the wall. And I said, that's great. You've taught her a life skill. She could really be a contractor. I thought that was a positive thing. But again, if there is a consequence for behavior, immediate, short-term, connected with what happened. And the other thing is, we often tell people what they can't do. You can't hit people here. You can't curse at people. But we don't tell them what they can do instead. How do we expect somebody to know what to do if we're not telling them that? I don't understand it, but we don't do that. We say, you cannot hit people here. This one young man, when he got mad in school, and he was in high school, he would curse at the teachers and curse at his peers using very offensive language. And the school would punish him for the language he was using. I said, if you are going to tell him he can't use that language in school, you need to tell him what language he can use. When you are frustrated, this is what you can say. You can't curse, but this is what you can say. You can't hit somebody if you're mad at them, but this is what you can do. Or you can go hit the punching bag, but you can't hit a person. So whenever we need to tell somebody you can't, we need to say, but you can do this. Again,
I don't know if
yeah.
this is a good time
Oh,
to take a quick break.
sure, if you'd
I
like to.
do have one, sorry, I'll go on camera. I do have one question just in regards to your slides. Is this something that you would be comfortable with sharing with the group?
Yeah, I will. I thought I had sent them to you, Lindsay. I apologize. I will send it to you so you can send it out to the people who attend today. Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. So
Yep.
we'll come back around 2:30. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Are we ready to start?
I think so.
Okay. And again, any questions? Be sure to put them in the chat box. Hold on 1 second. Oh, okay. Okay. So again, it's really helpful to just think about, and we don't think about how many times we give people multiple directions or multiple instructions or multiple rules. And again, understanding that it has nothing to do with paying attention. It has nothing to do with, how smart somebody is or how verbal somebody is. But if that immediate or working memory is impacted, then we need to break things down one step at a time, one direction at a time, and catch ourselves. And then when somebody doesn't follow through, say, oh, wait, no, I gave you too many instructions. Let me try again. And of course, recognizing all of this and being able to then apologize to a person when you haven't done the right thing, I think is really important. And sometimes we don't do enough of that either. Um, so again, the more senses we can use, the better. And again, the same thing in terms of being aware of verbal receptive language processing. So what I really like to do if I'm talking with somebody and giving them a whole lot of information is to say, can you help me with what you just understood I said? Because sometimes I'm just not clear enough. Not because you have problems, but because I'm not clear enough. I want to be sure that I was clear in what I said. And I talk a lot about checking true understanding. And true understanding is not, do you understand? And do you have any questions? But like, what does that mean to you? And how would you do that? And how would you follow that? Help me understand that better. I think that's really important. The more senses we can use, the better. So not just verbal, but also using visuals. And I apologize, I'm not using more than the slides. I'm not using more visuals. Um, Tactile, olfactory. This is why I think sometimes computer learning programs are good because they're visual, auditory, and tactile. And again, maybe get a daily calendar, maybe set alarms on a phone for, again, not only when the appointment is, but when you have to leave for the appointment is really useful. And that's useful for a lot of people, not just people with FASD, by the way. The other thing is that we assume that if somebody doesn't respond right away to what we tell them, that they are refusing to do it. And we know that again, one of the things that can happen with prenatal exposure is an interruption in the development of myelin in the brain, which is a substance that coats the nerves in the brain that allows messages to get transmitted in the brain. And that may be a reason why it takes more time to process what somebody says before acting. And yet there are, especially I've seen, for example, parenting programs that talk about giving kids time out, which I don't think is a good idea at all. If it's a break because you need a physical break, that's one thing, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing. But if the concept of time out is you need a time out to think about what you did and what you could do differently, that's not helpful. But the idea is if the youngster doesn't respond within 5 or 10 seconds, you add more time out. And if they still don't respond, you add more time out. Then you start taking things away from them. That's not useful at all. Because again, the idea is that it can take time to process information. Now, this also becomes a problem if people don't understand this, then they think the individual is being purposeful. And Bill at one point got involved in a situation where he was somewhere where he wasn't supposed to be. The police were called. The police told him to move and get out. He didn't move right away. So the police officer grabbed him and he hauled off and punched the police officer, because the only time he would ever get physically aggressive is if somebody grabbed him, because he had been physically abused as a young child. And he ended up in shackles in the hole in jail for 30 days. And it wasn't necessarily that he was refusing to move, but it takes time to process. So we need to give the individual time to process what we're asking them or telling them, and not just figure if they don't do it immediately, they're refusing to do it. And then again, limit the number of rules and check for true understanding. Again, I talked about true understanding is so much different than understanding. Just like the other piece is that if somebody goes into either for physical health or behavioral health, often people have to sign a consent, and they talk about informed consent. And I think that in FASD, informed consent is not reading a consent form to somebody and saying, do you understand? Do you have any questions? No, because I know that's what Bill would say. He would sign anything. And then they would say, well, you know what you signed because you agreed to it. It's true understanding. Help me understand what it means. Help me understand what this was. What I'm asking you. If you said to Bill as an adult, Bill, do you want your dad involved in your care? He would say yes. If you said to him, Bill, most people your age don't want their parents involved in their care, so you don't want your dad involved in your care, right? And he would say, right. And that was the way they got out of having to deal with me. So again, it's like how you ask the questions and whether you explain it or not makes a big difference. So true understanding in any situation is really important. And that's different than just, do you understand? So these are the rules I had for Bill. This is when he was young, well before I knew about FASD, but I cringe at this. Bed is to be made every morning before coming down to breakfast. You must be fully dressed before coming down for breakfast. Room must be clean any day before going out to play. Teeth must be brushed before going to school and before bed. Homework must be completed after school. Homework will be checked upon return home. There'll be no swimming or karate or going out if homework is not complete and correct and neat. Please don't do this. As I said, do as I say, not as I did. Learn from my mistakes. There is not one of these rules that makes any sense the way it's written. Not one of them. The idea of it would be really good to be able to be ready for school before we have breakfast, and explain why. Because usually when we're finished with breakfast, it's a rush to get out of the house in time for school. I mean, again, it's being able to explain. I couldn't possibly explain why I had any of these rules. But of course, back then you didn't have to explain it. You just had to say, here are the rules. And this stuff with homework, and especially the last one, was certainly the worst. And I've talked about that, because that's setting up reward and consequence, which is was setting him up to fail and to feel that he was just bad, or I was just mean, or both. And looking at these rules, I was pretty mean. So don't do this. The fewer rules, the better, and being able to explain, and rules that make sense. Try not to use metaphors, similes, idiomatic expressions, proverbs. If somebody is very literal in their thinking, those are really abstract. I would say to Bill, I'm going to pick you up about 5 o'clock, right? 5:01, he would call me, Dad, where are you? Well, I'm on my way, Bill. Why? Well, you told me I'd be here at 5 o'clock. No, I said about 5. No, that's abstract. Be very literal and clear. And if it's a person who stands too close to other people, not everybody does. Some people do, because the concept of personal space is a really abstract concept. How far do you stand from somebody when you talk with them? And if people are standing too close to other people, then some people get really uncomfortable with that. Some people may feel that that's they're challenging them and then get into a fight. So if there is somebody who is standing too close to other people, let's role play how far we stand from somebody when we talk with them to make them feel comfortable. And this is called personal space. Not quite sure what that means, but everybody feels more comfortable with a little bit of space in between them. So let's practice how far that is. That's better than saying you need to stand at arm's length when you talk with somebody, because then they run into people and hit them with their arm out. It's not helpful. But role playing it can be really useful. And again, that's only if this is an issue for this person. And sometimes it is. And then, like, Bill would stand way too close, and then he would get offended when people kind of backed off. Dad, they hate me. You're just a little too close, Bill. Let's practice how far you stand. And the other thing is that a lot of the people I've met over the years with FASD have an incredibly wonderful sense of humor and are very, very funny, and often can't tell if somebody's joking with them or if somebody is serious. And the reason for that is that processing humor is done in an area of the brain that's often affected by prenatal alcohol, but laughing is controlled in a different area of the brain. So if somebody was joking with Bill, he would typically think the person hates him or is out to get him, and he would feel really bad. If I was with him, I could tell if somebody was joking with him. I would say, Bill, they're just joking with you. Don't take it seriously. And he would say, oh, they are, Dad? Okay. And then he was fine. So what I always say is, again, if this is an issue, but he would laugh along with other people, and then people assume that since he was laughing, he got that it was that they were joking with him. And Bill's fourth grade teacher, years after he got his diagnosis of FAS at 19 years old, said, thinking back, another kid in the class would tell a joke. Bill would laugh along with the rest of the class and then turn to me and say, I don't get it. What's so funny? And I call that a red flag. That's a red flag that we totally missed. Absolutely totally missed. So I had to know that when I was joking with Bill, I had to say, Bill, I'm just joking with you. But he had such a wonderful sense of humor. And, that's why that question of what's been your funniest experience with your child, I think, or your loved one, I think that's such an important question to ask. And, there are two that always come to mind with Bill. One is that when he was like 23 or so, we would go shopping in the grocery store, and I would turn around to get something from the shelf and go to put it in the cart, and there are 5 extra things in the cart. And I would say, Bill, where did these come from? And he would laugh hysterically. And I'd say, Bill, put these back on the shelf. And he would put them back on the shelf. And then we'd go to the next aisle. I would get something, come back, 5 more things in the cart. I would say, Bill, where'd these come from? And he would laugh hysterically. I mean, and it was so funny. And he enjoyed that so much. And it was funny. The other one was, and I know might be getting a little too personal, but the other one was that when he was about 10, maybe 9 or 10 years old, we were asked if we would be willing to be interviewed for Adoption Month. And I asked Bill if he would be willing to be interviewed. And of course, he said, sure. So this interviewer that's from one of the radio stations came to the apartment and asked me some questions and asked Bill some questions about, how does it feel to be adopted, blah, blah, blah. And then at one point, she got up to leave and she said, Bill, she said, or Billy, his name was Billy at the time. I have one more question for you. How does it feel not to have a mom? Now, this was going to be played for Adoption Month, raise money. She really thought he was going to say, oh, I really wish that I had a mom. I really miss not having a mom. He looked at her, this 10-year-old, and said, well, I told my dad that if he got married, I'd kill him. And just to see the expression on this woman's face was, I wish I had a video camera. I absolutely wish I had a video camera at that time. It was priceless. And he didn't stop there. He went on to explain. And he said, well, at one point I thought I wanted a mom, and then I thought I wanted a mother, a brother, and a sister. But then I realized that if I had a mom, I wouldn't get as much attention. So I told my dad that if he got married, I'd kill him. I mean, it's like, and again, you talk about insight, right? Talk about, this kind of, I mean, these things, and we have to kind of latch on to those. We have to be able to laugh at some things that other people may not see fun. I don't think she saw the humor in it, but I thought it was hysterical. When he was 7 years old, I took him for a haircut, and he was talking with the woman cutting his hair. Very friendly, very talkative, very outgoing. And at one point he said, so are you married? And she said, yes. And he said, do you have children? And she said, yes. And he said, are they adopted? And she looked and she said, no. And he said, oh, so I guess you had them the other way. Anyway, it's like, so being able to laugh and being able to joke with them, but let them know that you're joking is really important. Again, recognize that they may change their story in terms of what happened, when it happened, how long ago it happened. Those are all abstract if you're not getting that sense of time, historical time and future time. And don't assume that the person is lying. And that's really important because so many times I hear this person is just lying, and then they're not believed as a witness, and they're not believed as a victim, and they're not believed when they're caught as charged as a perpetrator that they didn't do it, because then they'll say, well, where were you? And they make something up, or they say something because they don't remember where they were at that point. Again, evaluate the person's ability to manage money, but don't set them up to fail. So again, if maybe there's a youngster and you start with an allowance and you give them an allowance and they spend all of their money in the first 2 days, and they do that week after week, and then they're upset at the end of the week because they want something and they don't have any money, then don't keep doing that. Then, maybe we need to look at money differently. As Bill got older, there was no way that whatever money he had, he would spend because he has it. He can spend it. No sense of, oh, I need to save it for this in the future. So he needed a little bit of money every day rather than here's your money for the week or here's your money for the month, because that's just setting him up to fail and feel frustrated. So recognizing that and recognizing whether the person needs help with managing their money, because we want to be sure that everybody has their basic needs met. We don't want somebody to end up homeless because they spend all their money before they have to pay rent, and then they don't have money for rent. We don't want people to do that. I know in the States, we have representative payees, and sometimes people need a representative payee. Bill needed a representative payee to make sure his basic needs were met. Do they need somebody else to help control their money so that they have money for their basic needs? But it has to be somebody who is trustworthy. And that's a key piece of it. We don't want somebody who will easily take advantage. And then again, evaluate the need for a guardian. And one of the things about having a guardian is that it allows parents to continue to advocate for their adult children, which is an important thing, if they need that. Again, I said always check for true understanding, and I went through this already. How would you do what I just asked you to do? Let me show you how I would do it. Modeling. Now you show me how you would do it. And then role play skills you'd like the person to have, because it uses multiple senses. Social skills, especially things like if there's a group having a discussion together, how do you get into that discussion? If there people playing a game, how do you get into that game? Do you just go right into the middle of the game? And again, let's role play that. Telling them what to do isn't going to help, but let's role play it in different situations. And then point out misinterpretations when they occur, because that's the best way to make a connection. So Bill at one point wanted to be on a bowling league. So I found the bowling league and we were on separate teams in the same bowling league. And the first day of bowling, we get to bowling and he gets with his team, he meets his teammates, and a teammate is up to bowl, and Bill's in the back of the bowling alley yelling at the top of his lungs, "Go, Mark!" His teammate gives him an evil stare. And Bill comes over to me and says, "Dad, my teammates hate me. I'm quitting." And because I was there and I could see what happened, I said, "No, Bill, that's not it. You're just making too much noise." "But Dad, I want to cheer my team on. I want to be a good teammate." "I know, Bill, that's great. But you can't make any noise while they're bowling." So while you're bowling is an abstract concept. What does that mean? Well, they're bowling the whole day. No, until the ball hits the pins, you can't make any noise. Once the ball hits the pins, then you can cheer them on. Go back to your team. Went back to his team. Waited until the ball hit the pins to cheer his teammate on. Then, if they got a strike or a spare, he'd give them a high five. And at that point, he was about 6'1" and 245 pounds. He was very powerful. So his high fives were like wham. Well, wasn't too long before if his teammate got a strike or a spare, they'd like walk around out 3 alleys before they came back because they didn't want to get his high fives. He came to me, he said, "Dad, that's it. They won't talk to me. I'm quitting." "No, Bill, you're just a little too powerful. Let's practice high fives." So we practiced high fives until he got it really light. "Okay, that's how you do a high five, Bill. Go back to your team." And the rest of that day, he was okay. Next week, we got to bowling. His teammates up to bowl. Bill's in the back of the bowling alley, yelling at the top of his lungs, "Go, Mary!" Every day's a new day. "Bill, come over here. Let's go over this." Now remember, no noise until the ball hits the pins. And while you're here, let's practice those high fives. The third week of bowling, before he went to his team, I said, "Okay, Bill, let's go over this. No noise until the ball hits the pins. And let's practice those high fives." And then after about 3 months of that, he could go to bowling even if I wasn't able to go one week. And sometimes he would come back and say, "Dad, I think my teammates hate me." And I would say, "Bill, I wonder if you were just making too much noise today, or your high fives were too powerful." Important things, we need to remember that. And but by being there and seeing it, I could point that out. But before that happened, he was on a softball team where he went to practice once and he never went back. And he was on another bowling league where he went to bowling once and he never went back. And I know what happened in both of those cases. Like in the softball team, that they were talking with each other because they knew each other. Maybe they said hello to Bill, and they probably joked, and like he probably missed an easy fly, and just like they joked with other people, they said, "Can't believe you missed that easy fly," and he thought that they hated him and he quit. And I couldn't say when he got home, when he quit, "Bill, I wonder if this happened," because that's just too abstract. So the more you can point out misinterpretations, I know you think that person is mad at you, but they're just joking with you. I know you think that that person is out to get you, but they're having a bad day and it has nothing to do with you. I know you think your brother is out to get you, but he's having a bad day and it doesn't have anything to do with you. Pointing that out can be really helpful. And again, the social skills and what do you do? And the perception that other people have of what's going on is often so different from what's really going on. So at one point, I was doing a presentation at a conference, and in the middle of my talk, Bill walked into the room, walked up to me, and started talking to me. And I know that people in the room thought he was being rude and intrusive. He saw me there. He saw me talking. Clearly, he knew that I was busy, and obviously, he didn't care. That's what it looked like. And that's not what it was at all. What it was, I need to tell my dad something. There he is. It's not, I need to tell my dad something. There he is. He's busy. I don't give a shit. Sorry. It's, I need to tell my dad something. There he is. So recognizing that is so different. You have such a different response than thinking the person is being rude or intrusive. I was doing training for, this is a different residential substance use treatment program. And after I did my trainings, the executive director said, the other day, one of the women came up to me and started talking to me about some of the issues she was having. And the director said, I said to her, you really need to talk to Gloria about that. And Gloria was this woman's counselor. And Gloria was on the other side of the room talking with somebody else. And this woman got up, walked over to Gloria, and started talking to her. Well, the executive director said, you need to talk to Gloria about that. There's Gloria. I can talk to her. So again, it goes back to what's causing the behavior, in a sense, that question, right? That this was not rude, intrusive behavior. This is where the thinking goes to. Oh, I need to tell this person this. There they are. So, how you do that is really important. Again, I just said that. Don't interpret a lack of eye contact as a lack of respect, especially in certain taking into cultural issues into account. But eye contact may be really challenging in some, and they don't want to be challenging. They do well, again, because modeling is so helpful. Connecting the person with a pro-social peer, a big brother, big sister, can be really, really useful if that's available. Somebody, and I always say in school, the best class is really a small mixed categories class with some pro-social kids so they can model that pro-social behavior. And setting them up with a more pro-social buddy can be really, really useful. I remember years and years ago hearing, oh, I'm just blocking on her name. The one who edited Fantastic Anton Succeeds. I'll come up with her name. But anyway, there's a series, there's Fantastic Anton Succeeds and Fantastic Anton Grows Up. And she was talking at a conference that I heard, and she was talking about this young boy with an FASD who was not doing well in school and was being made fun of in school and kind of ostracized. And the family hired he was about 11 or 12, and they hired a 13-year-old to tutor him, who was a really pro-social kid, very popular kid in school. And the 13-year-old wanted to do a good job in tutoring this kid. and also didn't want to miss out on all his time hanging out with his friends at the mall. So he began to take this kid after he tutored him to the mall with him to hang out with his friends. And the other kids in school saw this unpopular kid hanging out with the popular kids, and he kind of became popular by association. And he started feeling better about himself. And again, building on his self-esteem and competence. So that can be really useful. So the way we do that is identifying what they like to do, what they do well, what they enjoy. Again, if it's art, if it's music, if it's dance, is there if it's animals, is there a program where we can connect them with some really pro-social people? Oh, I said this again. See, one direction at a time. I think that's important. Lots of consistency and repetition, recognizing that's to get it past damaged working memory. That's not because of a lack of attention. Work together to complete tasks. I think that that's really important. Again, review the rules, review instructions regularly. It's not just here are the rules, but how do you remember the rule when you need that rule, when you need to remember that rule? That's really important. I really like this last one here is something that was done at the Parent-Child Assistance Program, PCAP, in Washington State that was developed by Therese Grant, where they had, and this was a program for women at highest risk of giving birth to a child with an FASD. They had them take a notebook with them to appointments so that the providers they saw had to write in the notebook what they talked about, what the next steps were, what they needed to do. Not that they had to write in the notebook, but that the providers had to write. I like that a lot. Not here, you need to take this with you and you need to write down what they say. And the best thing is, of course, to have somebody go with them to the appointment so they can talk later about what happened. Because again, you're in an appointment and you're hearing all of this again, mostly verbal, receptive language processing based. You need somebody to be able to go over it later with you to go over, well, what happened and what did that mean? And what do we need to do about that? And the best thing, if they're okay with it, if they give their consent, is to have somebody go to their appointments with them as a support. I think that's really helpful. I think it's helpful with a lot of people. Maybe it's just when we get older, it's helpful. So somebody else is at the appointment and hears the same thing and then can go over it. Well, this is what I heard this person say. Identify when the individual, it's a youth or an adult, doesn't matter, is beginning to get angry, frustrated, anxious, or stressed. Because we know that there's an over release of cortisol, which is a hormone, under these minor stressful situations. So we need to identify what are the signs that they're beginning to get angry, frustrated, anxious, or stressed, and then work on identifying two things that help them calm down when they're upset. And the first thing I would ask anybody is, what helps you calm down when you're upset? And some people can tell you. And some people will say, I have no idea. I don't know. If they can tell you, that's great. If they can't tell you, then let's try different things and end up with two. Don't give them too many choices, but two is plenty. So for some people, for Bill, it was hitting a punching bag. But he had to do that immediately. Otherwise, he would kick the walls and kick the doors. For some people, it may be listening to soft music. It may be taking a walk or doing a run, or it may be reading something, a book. I wouldn't use hip hop or heavy metal or rap music, but soft music. For some people, they've reported that putting ice water on their face or on their wrists helps them calm down when they're upset. So for some people, it's crawling into a big cardboard box that's carpeted on the inside and open on one end, or crawling under a beanbag chair. Sorry. Crawling under a beanbag chair. let's identify 2 things out of all those. We can test them out, see how you feel. Which 2 things do you think would help you the most calm down when you're getting upset? And then how do we talk about, okay, when I see you getting upset, how can I let you know that? Because eventually we want them to identify themselves. What are the signs? We all have physiological signs that we're getting upset and we don't pay attention to them. For some people, their face gets red, or they feel hot, or they clench their fists, or they clench their teeth, or they start to shake, or they get really loud, or they get really soft. What are those signs that what I see when you're beginning to get upset is this is what I see happening. So when I see that, can I let you know to do one of those 2 things we talked about? Now, I call that take a chill out. It's not go to the, take a time out. It's go to take a chill out, which is a positive thing. And so it's again identifying those 2 things. And then, would it be helpful for me to give you a sign that says go take a chill out? And that has to be done in school, at home, in other settings, because it has to be immediate, because we have to interrupt the over release of cortisol. So that's really important, is taking that chill out. I know that there was an after-school program for individuals with FASD a number of years ago. I think it was in Minnesota, that found that, and they had a beanbag chair, a big beanbag chair in a corner of the room, and they found that these individuals, when they needed a break, they would crawl under the beanbag chair and put it over them. That's why I said like a box that's donated by an appliance store, and carpeted on the inside with donated carpeting from a carpet store. I look for donations all the time. So, but a big box which open on one end that they may put over them. And it's kind of like to shut everything out if there's too much, if they're overstimulated. And it may be 5 minutes to take a chill out. That can be really, really useful, but it's got to be immediate. And it can be in the middle of a group. It can be in the middle of a lesson. They can't wait until the end of group or the end of lesson, because then the cortisol is released and it's too late and they're angry or frustrated or stressed or anxious. So talk about what's the best way to let them know? Is it a sign that we say, or is it a word that we say that we have between the 2 of us, between us, to go and take the chill out? And a chill out space can be set up in any setting. And it's a corner of a room that may be, again, depending on what it is that helps the person calm down. It may be having a book. It may be having a little player with soft music. It may be, again, having a punching bag. For Bill, when he was at this group residence, when he got mad, he would kick the walls and kick the doors and get punished for it. And I said to the manager, I said, I want to get a punching bag and put it in the living room so that when the staff see him getting upset, they can tell him to go hit the punching bag. And the manager said, well, no, we can't do that. If he really wants to hit the punching bag, he can walk to the Y 4 blocks away, sign in, wait for the punching bag to be available, and then hit the punching bag. And I said, that's not going to work. And this was long before Joanne Weinberg's work on stress and anxiety, and the over-release of cortisol. And I said, that's not going to work. He needs to do it right away. I knew that he needed to do it right away. I didn't know why, but now I know why. There's a reason, because we had to interrupt the over-release of cortisol. So it had to be immediate. So he kept on kicking the walls when he got frustrated and getting into trouble. So again, it's just recognizing that this is something that is really helpful, and it's helpful in any setting. And if somebody says, well, that's rewarding bad behavior, I said, no, if you don't do it, then it escalates. And if you do provide this, then it can avoid those big upsets for everybody involved. one of my big things is don't ignore negative attempts to get attention. And I hear a lot, if somebody's trying to get your attention in a negative way, you need to ignore the behavior. And I don't think that's a good idea. Not just in FASD for anybody, but especially in FASD. It's not a good idea because we all want attention. And most of us have no idea how to get attention in a positive way, often. So if somebody is trying to get your attention in a negative way, we need to acknowledge, I see you need my attention, and then be able to deal with it. And then maybe talk about what a better way to get your attention might be. Bill would come up and talk with me in the middle of a phone call. And I would say, Bill, I can't talk to you right now. And he would go off thinking that I hated him. And I learned that when he did that, and then he would do something wrong where I had to pay attention to him. And that's what happens. If you ignore negative attempts to get attention, it will escalate until you have to pay attention. And then it will be negative attention that they get. And then it will reinforce that they're just bad. So I learned with Bill, like when he came to interrupt me when I was on the phone, I needed to put my hand on his shoulder and say, Bill, wait here. I'll be with you as soon as I'm off the phone. Or to be able to say to him, if it was going to be a long call, as soon as I'm off the phone, Bill, I'll come and get you and we'll talk. But letting them know that. There was another example in another residential program where a young woman would come and interrupt the staff, usually when we're dealing with a crisis. And then she would go off, and within 15 or 20 minutes, she would do something where she needed to be restrained. And I said, my guess is she goes off thinking that you hate her. And the staff said, well, she said to us that she thinks that we don't like her. But we said, no, we really do like you. And I said, but she can't tell that the reason you won't talk with her is because you're busy. Even though that seems to be pretty obvious, she can't tell that. So the next time she comes to interrupt you, you need to say to her, I can't talk to you right now. I'm busy. I'll come and get you as soon as I'm free. I'm not mad at you. And I said, and then I don't think she's going to need to get restrained. And again, it worked because it was just that acknowledgement and that, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm busy right now. I'll get you as soon as I'm done. And then be sure you go and get her as soon as you're done. But don't ignore those negative attempts because they will escalate. And we don't want them to escalate to something dangerous. They may do better with shorter groups and not hour-and-a-half groups. They may do better sitting next to the facilitator. I remember when I began learning about FASD, I heard a woman say, what I need is a stander. I need somebody to stand next to me that helps me focus. And again, always depends on the individual and what each individual's needs are. But again, may do better with shorter groups, may do better sitting next to the facilitator. If it's somebody who talks a lot and interrupts a lot, then I would ask them to sit next to the facilitator, or if I was the facilitator, would you mind sitting next to me? And I know that you have a lot of really important things that you want to say during group, and you get so excited that you don't even recognize that somebody else is already talking. So would it be okay if you start talking when somebody's already talking, if I just put my hand on your shoulder and say, Joan, Mary over there is talking. As soon as she's done, you can talk. Would that be okay? That can really help. Instead of the person's on the other side of the group and then people get mad at Joan because she's interrupting. And we want them to feel part of. We don't want them to feel apart from. Again, work with them to keep their area uncluttered, and simple if that's an issue for them. Because if they get easily overwhelmed and overstimulated with lots of stuff around, then less is better as a support. They may do well with a checklist of what are the steps, like, in other words, to clean their room, which is an abstract concept. What does that mean to clean your room? I would say, Bill, clean your room. And I would go to the room and I would say, Bill, I told you to clean your room. And he would say, I did. And I said, Bill, this room's a mess. But he moved one thing and he thought that was cleaning his room. And he really did. He wasn't being obnoxious. He thought that was cleaning his room. So what are the steps to getting the room clean? And then you do that checklist with them repeatedly until it gets more into long-term memory and you can say, okay, it's time to clean your room. Go do your checklist and check those things off. And when all the checks are done, that's how you know your room is clean, not by looking at it, but by having all those checks done. Because the person may not be able, Bill couldn't tell when his room was clean, but all the checklists, all the checks needed to be done. And maybe you have photos, but if you have a photo, because some people have done this, they've done a checklist with a photo of what they'd like the room to look like. And if you want to do that, then you'd better also have a photo of what it looks like under the bed and what it looks like in the closet. Because if you only have a photo of what the room looks like when Bill was in this apartment program, they had room checks and the floor had to be clean, nothing on the floor. And of course, they never opened the closet. And when I opened his closet, everything was thrown into the closet. And he then complained that he had no sneakers. He had 3 pairs of sneakers in the closet. And it wasn't that he wanted new sneakers. He didn't realize they were there because everything was just thrown into the closet. And then work together to do it. And then good job. Remember, good job for each step that you're doing. Good job. Let's do the next. Again, some of the causes of behaviors may involve sensory issues. It may be certain smells that set them off, or tastes, or temperatures, or lights, or sounds, or the feel of certain fabrics, as I say here. Bill used to rip all of his shirts, and he was seen as just being destructive, so he had to be consequenced because he was being destructive, until I realized he couldn't tolerate the feeling of the tags that were sewn in his shirts. And tags were always sewn in the seam of the shirt. So if you rip the tag out, you rip the shirt. And when I cut all the tags out of his shirts, he didn't rip any more shirts. This was not willful destructive behavior. This was a sensory issue. And for some, it's turning clothes inside out because even if they don't have tags, there are seams on the insides of clothing. And often it's not even the ability to articulate that that's what's bothering them, but they know that something is bothering them. Again, highly sensitive to these sensory stimuli. They may be seen as a person may be seen as a very picky eater, but it may be the temperature or the texture or the taste of certain foods that the person can't tolerate. Maybe it's mashed potatoes or peas or ice cream. Again, pay attention to those kinds of things. It may be certain smells that they then have a tantrum and they can't tolerate that smell. So let's look at what's going on at the time that they're having this tantrum or this rage and what might have set that off. They may do better with no bright colors or patterns on the walls or on their sheets or their pillowcases, or in their room. They may do better with softer colors, softer patterns. Make sure that the sheets on the bed are not wrinkled, for especially those who have trouble with sleep. We need to make sure that that's not due to sensory issues. For example, sheets wrinkled may impair their ability to get to sleep or stay asleep. Bright patterns on their sheets. Maybe the detergent that's used, the smells, the perfumes that are used in detergents often, or the itchiness. Sometimes powdered detergents cause more itchiness than liquid detergents. There are liquid detergents that have, that are scent free, which may be much better. But again, not assuming that what's going on is willful and purposeful. But it goes back to that question. What's causing what we're seeing? What's causing the difficulties? And how can we address it? Maybe the fabrics of their pajamas or of the blanket may be difficult for them. Again, avoiding fluorescent lights. If there's a lot of noise going on, they may do better with earbuds. In the old days, I might have said headphones. And actually, headphones seem to be coming back these days. I see more and more people wearing them. But, there was a time where you wore headphones and it really did set you apart. So earbuds, but that might help filter out some of the noise. They may do better to have something in their hands to fidget with, as long as it's soft. When I started at the FASD Center for Excellence, they wanted to have some kind of fidget thing. And they were looking at things, and I looked at some of the things that they were thinking of, and there was one that was like a hard ball. I said, no, you don't want anything that can hurt somebody if they happen to throw it at them. You want something that's soft. So if they do end up getting frustrated and throw it, it's not going to hurt anybody or break anything. Again, I talked about the clothes. Find something that the person likes to do and does well, that's safe and legal. I always need to say safe and legal. We want to be sure. And work to have them do that regardless of their behavior. Don't use it as a reward for good behavior and take it away for bad behavior, with the idea that if they're really motivated and they want to do this, then they'll do what they need to do to get it. No, that's really setting them up to fail. We want to build self-esteem and competence. And the way we do that is building on their strengths and abilities and what they like to do and what they do well. So pay attention to that. Don't reject something like, here's somebody who says, I want to be a veterinarian, and they're really struggling in school. Oh, forget it. You can't be a vet. That's so hard. It's so hard to get into vet school. You can never be a vet. Why would you say that? You want to be a veterinarian? That sounds really great. Let's look into what it is that you'll need in order to be a veterinarian. But in the meantime, let's, look into what is it like to work with animals? And is there, again, a humane society or something that you can volunteer at, or we can volunteer at together to see how does it feel to work with animals and what piece of that. And we can't be fair. So if everybody has the same rules and the same consequences for breaking the rules, we are not being fair because everybody is different. Everybody is dealing with different things in their life and different struggles. So the key really is, in order to be fair, we have to look at what each individual needs in order to reach their best potential. I don't talk about succeeding. I talk about reaching their best potential, because that's different for everybody. And even in a family, we can't really treat all our kids the same because they're all different. And it doesn't mean you love one of them more than the other or less than the other, but it's different. They're all different. They're all individuals. And they may need different things in order to reach their best potential. I know that you think that I'm letting her get away with something I don't let you get away with, but you're able to do things that she has difficulty with. And it's not even talking about diagnosis, it's talking about wanting to be fair and look at what's going to be most helpful for each of you. A number of parents have found that teaching their kids with FASD sign language is really useful. And at first when I first heard this, I thought, that's really strange because that's not easy to learn. And then I realized it makes perfect sense because, of course, sign language is visual. It's not auditory. It's not based on verbal receptive language processing skills. So that may be really useful. And as I said, create a chill out space in each setting. We want to be sure we're using literal language. And we want to be sure that we're talking about people with FASD. People with FASD are people. And, that's my bias with anything. There's no such thing as a schizophrenic. There's no such thing as an oppositional person. There may be a person who has oppositional behavior. There may be a person who has schizophrenia, but that's not who they are. And so we want to understand, because if we look at people as their syndrome, their problem, their illness, their disorder, whatever it is, then that becomes their identity. And FASD is not an identity. It's not who the person is. It's what they have, and they have incredible strengths and abilities, which we want to tap into. And it's part of their life, but it's not their entire identity. They may be a great artist. They may be, a great musician or something else, a great daycare worker. And so recognizing that, I think, is really important. We want to set the person up to succeed. So they may do well with a mentor, and they may do really well mentoring others. And again, we can only have the person mentor others when we recognize their strengths and abilities. There was a young man in a residential center who tended to be very aggressive, got into lots of trouble. He happened to be an excellent artist. He loved to draw. And not only did he love to draw, but he liked showing other people how to draw. And I said to the staff, I said, can you set it up for him to teach a drawing class? Now, the only way that you can set this up is that you set a certain day and time that he teaches a drawing class. And unless he is being physically aggressive at that moment or physically ill, he teaches the drawing class. It's not based on his behavior during the week. It's not even based on his behavior earlier that day. But let's say it's Friday at 3:00. He teaches a drawing class, and it may be to staff as well as to residents. And if you're not willing to set it up that way, then don't set it up. If you want to use it as a reward for good behavior, then I don't want you to do it at all. But they were willing to do that. And his behavior in the residence improved. And his behavior in school improved because we were recognizing some of his strengths and building on those. So he could be a mentor for others by doing this. The young woman who kept on kicking holes in the walls loved doing origami, Japanese paper folding. And I said the same thing to them that I said, ask her if she would like to teach an origami class and set it up that's part of her day. That's a structured part of her day. It's not a reward. If family members have an FASD, in vivo parenting of the parent with the child together are the best. Parenting classes are a waste of time, energy, and money if somebody has FASD often, because the part of the brain that's responsible for figuring out what to do in a specific situation and taking something learned in one situation and applying it to another is often impacted by prenatal alcohol. So the idea of learning something in a parenting class and remember the whole concept of time and remembering it 4 days later when something comes up is really difficult for many. And again, this has nothing to do with ability. It has to do with how the brain is processing information, which has nothing to do with how smart somebody is. Again, we want to model appropriate behaviors. We want to help develop affect regulation. There are some people who never developed good affect regulation, which is the ability to put words and facial expressions to the entire range of feelings. Now, that may be because of a lot of different reasons. It may be because they moved from place to place to place when they were really young. It may be because there was some inconsistent caregiving early on, because affect regulation begins to develop about 3 months of age by the infant modeling the behavior of the primary caregiver. So the primary caregiver is holding the infant, cooing and smiling, and I'm so happy you're here, and all that wonderful stuff. And then sometimes the primary caregiver may be sad about something, still holding the infant and crying and saying, I'm really sad today. And sometimes maybe they're mad about something, still holding the infant, saying, I'm really mad. So over time, again, it's that modeling of the facial expressions and the words for the whole range of feelings. And there are components of affect regulation where if it's missed because of other things going on, whether it's in the family or being moved or in the, because of the individual themselves, then we see behaviors that look like willful, purposeful, often acting out behaviors that may be a reflection of a lack of the development of early affect regulation. So we can go back and help with affect regulation, which is putting words and facial expressions to the entire range of feelings for oneself as well as for the other individual. You look really mad today. Are you mad today? I mean, with Bill, he would walk around with the same angry expression. And I found out that even if he was happy, he had the same expression. And we don't respond to people based on what they're feeling. We respond to people based on what we see. And if we see that they're ready to attack, that's what we respond to. So we had to practice different facial expressions for different feelings. And the fact that he was in 7 homes by the time he was 6 years old added to that concept that he never developed good early affect regulation. So it also means that we need to model the range of affect. We need to be able to put words and facial expressions to the entire range of feelings: anger, frustration, stress, anxiety, happiness, sadness, and put the words and facial expressions. If you don't have the words and facial expressions for the feeling, all you have to express the feeling is action. And when it comes to feelings like anger, frustration, stress, and anxiety, that's aggression. And when we see individuals who are really aggressive, I think it may be that lack of development of early affect regulation and the ability to put words and facial expressions to the feelings. And in order to address the aggression, we need to help identify what are the feelings and what are the triggers that set off the feelings, that set off the behaviors. And how do we get, because we can interrupt it when it gets to that early triggers and feelings that are set off. And how do you respond? Because there's nothing wrong with the feelings. It's how they're expressed that gets people into difficulty. And then we need to ensure that everybody understands FASD. Easier said than done, clearly. All of you know that. So again, this is kind of, I've said probably all of this. But again, tell them repeatedly what they're doing right, what they're doing well. Limit the stimuli. Be consistent in routines. Don't isolate them unless it's necessary for safety. So I'm a big proponent. If we need to talk about what happened, have a time in. You need a time in. Come here, let's talk about what happened. Or maybe it's, go to the chill out space, hang out there for a while, and I'll be there, and then we'll talk about this if you need a break. And what I also find, and what I found with Bill and with others, is that they're much smarter than we are. So that, I mean, if I started talking with Bill, if I was upset and I would be talking with Bill, he would start to walk away from me. And of course, I would go after him and say, look at me when I'm talking to you. He was so much smarter than I was. And he just needed a break. He needed space. And I needed space. And I didn't realize that. So he was much smarter than I was. So giving the person space, not we have to talk about this immediately, but giving people space to chill out is really helpful. Again, be tolerant around issues around eating and foods and what foods do they like and what foods don't they like. That can be really, really useful and really helpful rather than they have to eat everything. or they have to, and some people I find are very slow in eating, and some people are very fast in eating. And, it's like, okay, you're so slow in eating. We're finished with the meal. We're taking the dishes away. Then you'll learn to eat faster with the rest of us. Or, they're way too fast with eating and they need to sit at the table with everybody else. And that'll teach them to slow down. And that might not work. If it's a person who tends to elope or run away, my bias is don't punish them for running away and think that that's going to change their behavior. But let's identify a safe place that they can run to. Anytime you feel you need to get away, let's talk about where you can go. Here's where you can go. Let's check that out. Ideally, maybe it's someplace in the house or in the backyard, or maybe it's a neighbor. But the idea is if we set up a safe place to run to, for them to run to, then we know that they're safe, because I want to be sure that you're safe. That's what I worry about. I want to be sure that you're safe. And if we don't do that, often they run and they get into serious trouble. So whenever we can do that and set up a safe place for them to run to, that might be really useful. Developing when-then strategies means that if it's somebody who has repeated certain behaviors, then think about, okay, when they do this, how am I going to respond? That helps reduce some of that immediate anger that we often respond with, that we don't want to respond with. Oh, gee, you did this again. I'm really sorry. Here's what we need to do. And the more we can do that, the more we may get, better responses. I think that sometimes it takes away from kind of the anger. And if somebody is really feeling that they're just bad, then they're going to set up situations to prove that they're bad and may egg somebody on to reinforce that self-image. And we need to work really hard at not letting them do that and not having them do that. So when Bill would say, I can't believe they gave you a child to raise, you are the worst parent in the world, and I want you to put me up for adoption. And although there were days when I was like, that was very tempting, I had to say, sorry, you're stuck with me. But at the beginning, when he first said that, it really hurt my feelings. And I wanted to defend myself. I'm not a bad parent. I'm really not. I'm trying to do the best thing. But that was the wrong response. But it's like, so then I got to the point of, okay, when he says this, because he said it more than once, that was my response. Well, sorry, you're stuck with me. And I knew that he didn't believe that because that wasn't his experience in life. His experience was, for some reason, he kept on getting thrown out. Must be that he was just bad. So better to make it happen than to be blindsided and think that you're safe and then get blindsided. So understanding that, I think, so whenever we can think if there's repeated behavior, how are we going to respond when we see this again? And then we practice that so that we can say, oh, gee, I'm really sorry about this, but this is what happened. At one point, I set up a tape recording when he did a certain thing. When the tape recording said, and when he did something, I would just press the tape recorder and it would say, Bill, you need to go and do this and go and do this. And then go and do this, or whatever it was. And then I would walk away. And it ended up we had, many fewer like arguments in that way. I think that for youth who are in school or people who are in school, we need to separate home and school. The idea that they do something in school and they need to be consequenced at home is a terrible idea. I think it's important for home to know what's going on in school. I think it's important for school to know what's going on at home, but it's like whatever goes on in school needs to be dealt with in the school and not dealt with at home. Not you misbehaved in school today, so you can't play Nintendo. I don't think that doesn't help with a lot of these youth. I happen to think that the best thing is to have no homework unless there's somebody who loves homework. I think, and at one point I had a discussion again with a young man in high school, and the behavior specialist said he has to do his homework every night. And I said, why do you want him to have homework? Do you want him to have homework because everybody in high school has homework? That's not a good enough reason. Do you want him to have homework because you think that that will help him retain what he learned during the day in school? Okay, I don't think that's going to work, but okay. Then if that's the case, let's set a time limit for homework. And an hour to an hour and a half of homework is plenty. Because what takes other kids an hour to do, they take these kids 4 or 5 hours to do. And then they start hating home and school because they get home and then they have to start their homework. Then they have to have dinner. Then they have to go back and do their homework. Then it's time to go to bed. Then it's time to get up in the morning. And then they have to go back to school. Then they lost their homework on the way to school. So then they have more homework that night. It's like, oh my God. Whatever gets done in that hour to hour and a half gets done. And this is for high school. This is not for kindergarten. When I hear about kindergarten kids having homework, it just blows my mind. Okay. Whatever gets done in that time gets done. Whatever doesn't get done does not get added to the next day. And they're only graded in school on what they completed, not what's expected of them. And if they don't get things back to school, we have to come up with other ways. It may be emailing to school. It may be something else, because the idea of having these papers and knowing where they are and getting them from one place to another when there are all these other issues going on can be overwhelming. And we don't want to set them up to fail and feel bad. So many kids with FASD really like school and elementary school. And when they hit middle and high school, as I said with Bill, it's just overwhelming, overstimulating, higher expectations, and it's too much for them. And we want to keep them liking school. So the other thing is, I had one of these youth, the teacher would send a notebook home every day with what happened in school. And lo and behold, this kid, he's an adolescent, was not getting the notebook home. What a surprise. How many times would we want to bring something home that says what they did wrong in school? So I said, what I'd like to do for the next 2 weeks is for the teacher to write in that notebook only what has gone right during the day, what they've done well, and show them what you've written. And then at home, I want the parents to write what they did well in the evening to send it back to school and see if he does better bringing the notebook back and forth. Again, it's shifting to the positives from the negatives. In terms of sleep, because sleep is such a huge issue in FASD. And again, the estimates are 50 to 85% of those with FASD have significant sleep disturbances. And they may have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, different than ADHD, which may be problems getting to sleep, but not staying asleep. So we need to look at what are the issues specifically with each individual around sleep. Is it them getting to sleep? Is it them staying asleep? Is it waking up early? In terms of medication, depends on what the sleep issues are. For example, some people think that if somebody's having trouble with sleep, we give them melatonin. And if they don't respond, we'll give them more melatonin. But melatonin only helps people get to sleep. It doesn't help people stay asleep. If necessary, there may be other medications that are used to help people stay asleep. And there are also often medications that are used because of the side effects of the medication, not because of the reason the medication was first developed. There's some work that's being found that if they have restless leg, it may be an iron deficiency. Now, that doesn't mean we should run out to the drugstore or the grocery store and get iron supplements and give this person mega doses of iron supplements because too much iron is toxic. But it does mean that if they have restless leg, we might want to ask their physician to get iron levels and see if there's a deficiency. The body produces melatonin, but in FASD, it seems that there may be impairments in the ability of the body to produce melatonin. The other thing is a normal sleep cycle for most of us is about 90 minutes between REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, or active sleep, and that's really when we have dreaming. And then there's a period of deep sleep or non-REM sleep, which is quiet sleep. And then we're back up to REM sleep. Then we're back to deep sleep. And that's about a 90-minute cycle. So you get this whole period of restful, quiet sleep. But for some with FASD, that sleep cycle may be 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and they may never get that deep sleep. And the whole issue around sleep is that it seems that the circadian clock is run by a certain nucleus in the hippocampus of the brain. And we know the hippocampus is one of the areas in the brain that's impacted by prenatal alcohol. So it disrupts the circadian clock. And then we need to get that reset in a way. So there are things around sleep hygiene that have been identified, like a bedtime routine. So again, routines consistent, same meal times every day as much as possible, same bedtime every day, not a different bedtime on weekdays, weekends, holidays, vacations, same bedtime every day. As much as possible, the same routines, and being specific. Bedtime is another abstract concept. It's your bedtime. Does that mean think about being in bed in the next 4 hours? Does that mean being in bed in 15 minutes? Does that mean starting to brush your teeth or get in pajamas? What does that mean? We need to be literal. And we need to give person, 15 minutes until time for bed. Remember, prepare people. Avoid big meals near bedtime. Avoid caffeine, of course. The bedroom should be used for sleep, ideally, which means no computer, no TV in the bedroom. It should be quiet. It should be comfortable, not too hot, not too cold. It should be fairly dark. If you're going to exercise in the morning or early afternoon, but not at night, natural light is really important. And if there isn't a lot of natural light, there are broad spectrum lights that used to be very expensive, and now they're much, much cheaper. And they can help reset the circadian clock. Bill used to stay up all night long and watch TV shows that got him into a lot of difficulty. And then he would sleep during the day, and he would, not be able to pay attention. He had more memory problems. And I got these broad spectrum lights. At that point, it was big light box, and would in the morning wake him up and sit him in front of that light box for 20 minutes every morning. And that helped reset his circadian clock so that he could go to sleep at night and be up during the day. Maintain an emotionally stable and positive tone, easier said than done. Again, use a transitional object if that's needed. And it may be a stuffed animal, it may be a toy, it may be a therapy dog or a therapy animal where, that may help with sleep. And again, in terms of medication, we need to talk about it with a physician who understands sleep hygiene and understands FASD.
Dan, just
Yeah.
a 10-minute warning here.
Okay. So I'm going to skip that one. So in terms of education, same kinds of things. Be consistent in routines. Have the youth sit next to the teacher or in the front row as a support, not as a punishment. And again, how we approach these things makes such a world of difference. It's much more helpful for you to be in the front row so we can see each other better, and so that if I see that you need a break, I can give you that sign that we came up with to go take a chill out. Eliminate homework or set a time limit for homework, or have them do it in school. Whatever gets done gets graded on, not what you expect them to do. Computer learning programs may be good. Prepare them early and often for transitions. Don't change seating assignments. Have their feet touch the floor. If their feet aren't touching the floor, they're not paying attention. Cover up materials that aren't being used. Set up a chill out space. Keep the classroom door closed. Again, softer lighting, softer sound, softer colors. In treatment programs, again, I talked about all of this. I think that the goal for people, for anybody, should not be independence. I used to train intensive case managers who worked with people with serious and persistent mental illness. And I saw lots and lots of treatment plans that had a long-term goal to live independently in the community. And I would ask them, how many of you live independently in the community? And some of them would raise their hands. And I said, living independently means you never count on anybody for anything at any time in your life. And they would put their hands down. And I said, then why do we want people who are differently abled or have, or neurodiverse to, that wasn't a word we used back then, but I can use it now, to do things that we would never do ourselves? And I would say to them, I don't want to see a treatment plan with the goal to live independently in the community. I'd love to see a plan where a goal is to live interdependently in the community, which means that you know who you can count on for help when you need it. That to me is the goal, interdependence, not independence. And medication should never be a goal. I worry if somebody's goal in life is to take medication that makes them drool or twitch or have sexual problems or get tired. But medication is often a step towards achieving a goal. I can focus better when I take my medication. But I've seen so many plans where the second goal was to take medication as prescribed. We need to address loss issues for individuals and for families. Everybody with an FASD has experienced losses, and we need to acknowledge them. And sometimes it's the loss of their initial hopes and dreams, or a family's initial hopes and dreams. And if we don't in some way help recognize, acknowledge those losses and mourn those losses, then people get stuck. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who really popularized the concept of addressing loss and grieving back in the late 60s, at one point said that if people do not in some way mourn their losses, they end up living in the past, regretting the present, and fearing the future. And what I see is if we don't really mourn those losses, or we don't talk about things like, what did you hope for yourself when you were younger? And what are you hoping for yourself at this point? And so if we don't sometimes let go of some early hopes and dreams, we can't then develop new hopes and dreams that we feel really good about. So we just need to address those issues and talk about the losses that somebody has experienced, so that we can move on and develop new positive expectations and hopes. And if we use the students as therapists, we're recapitulating losses. One rule at a time, true understanding, blah, 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 blah. Oh, all this, and often, and absolutely warm handoffs. If they're moving from one place to another, or if they're in school from one grade to another, there needs to be a warm handoff. Let them see that next classroom before the end of the school year, so they know where they're going. If they're going to see a new therapist, let them meet the new therapist. Or they're going to a different program, let them see the program before they go there. That's really the best thing to do. Again, in social situations, they may do well with a socialization coach, which is what I used to call it, who can model with them different social situations and how best to interact. And again, be that model for them. because the desire for social situations and for socialization, and not getting rejected by others. And again, be very careful about access to social media. I think we just need, at a very early age now, it seems, to start talking about the fact that people often pretend to be somebody they're not. And it's almost impossible for anybody to figure that out on their own. So anytime you get a message on social media, whatever it is, or on your cell phone or whatever, let's talk about it. And let's try to figure out, is this somebody who is who they say they are?
Well, yeah,
And
I'm
how do we
here.
check
Sorry,
that
it's
out?
just really weird because I'm also in a.
Okay, and then there's some things about job situations. They do better with a one-to-one job coach who can help with the social aspects of a job. What do you do when the boss yells at you? Do you say, screw you? And again, it's not just learning the skills of a job. It's the social aspects that are really difficult because they're more abstract. And I know I only have a couple of minutes left. So again, in terms of sexual, we have to talk about sex and we have to talk about death. Sorry about that, but we need to start talking about that. It amazes me in 40 years of thinking about FASD, very, very few people talk about this. But talk about the risk. We want to talk about the risk for HIV and the risk for sexually transmitted infections and the risk for things like getting involved with sex trafficking. We need to be really literal in how we talk about it and do role playing and simplify medication schedules. Really important to talk about sex education and what that means. Because if somebody tells them you can't get pregnant the first time you have sex, oh, okay. And then they believe it. That's not helpful. And then with suicide, because there is a higher risk for suicide attempts. And we know that from the wonderful work that the adult the change makers group has done with the surveys. It is at high risk. And I think one of the reasons is we don't talk about death as final. So you have somebody who may be very literal in their thinking, and you're talking with them about the person who died, and well, they're at peace now. And this person thinks, well, I want to be at peace. So then if I kill myself, then I'll be at peace. Or, well, she's with God. Well, I want to be with God. So if I kill myself, then I'll be with God. Or I see how upset people are that somebody died. So if I kill myself, then I'll see that people care about me because I'll see how upset they are. Because if you're not thinking through to the consequences of your actions, you don't get to that point. So we need to change how we do things. We need to say, what are you going to do tomorrow? And we need to do things like change things and talk about death differently and not say things, well, she's at peace or they're lost. Because if they're lost, then we can find them. And the other thing is, I think, we need to say, getting them to sign a contract is not going to work. But anytime you feel this way, you call me. And if I'm not around, here's who you call. And this is what you can do if you're feeling really upset. Here's some things that you can do. 2 things that will help you calm down. The distraction techniques. Art, therapy, movement, dance, cultural traditions and rituals, animal-assisted therapy, and exercise can all be really, really helpful. And we want to tap into those to build self-esteem and confidence and to help them feel part of something positive. Don't use zero tolerance policies. No eject programs work much better. And then I have these strategies to avoid, which is in the handout, which Lindsay will send out. So again, a lot of the behavior that we see is due to how the brain is processing information. I didn't change this because I don't talk about damage to the brain, but the impact of prenatal alcohol on the developing brain. Everything involving a person with FASD, the FASD needs to be taken into account in terms of how we address it, how the person's brain is processing information. Our goal is to modify a person's environment so they can reach their best potential, not for them to change their behavior, but for us to modify the environment so they can reach their best potential or their full potential. And of course, use a strength-based approach, support families, increase social supports. And this was something we developed years ago. I was involved in developing the FASD curricula for Alaska. And it's like positive interventions require people who are patient, encouraging, hopeful, supportive, committed to developing relationships, non-judgmental, not punitive, creative and flexible, able to use humor appropriately, and able to identify strengths. And we have to strive for that. It's not easy, but we have to strive for that. Okay, so I'm going to go back and do one more thing. Sorry, if you can hang in there. It was developed by the Parent-Child Assistance Program. I've shared it with a number of different people, not just around FASD, but around other issues, mental health issues. So, sorry, this is somebody where we talk a lot about who you can't hang out with, what you can't do anymore, what you should be doing, but we do it verbally, which doesn't work. So this is, you take out a piece of paper and you draw a circle and you draw a fence. And then you talk about who are people who have been helpful to you in your life. They've never gotten you into trouble. They haven't abused you. They haven't humiliated you. They haven't set you up. You haven't used with them. They haven't made you use. Those names get written in their circle of support. Who are people who have beaten you up, taken advantage of you, abused you, set you up? Those names get written on the other side of the fence. Who are people you're not sure about? Those names get written on the fence. So the first thing I would say is nobody you meet for the first time ever gets written in your circle of support. I don't care if it's a new psychiatrist. They get written on the fence until we figure out where they belong. Because we don't want somebody meeting somebody at the bus stop and putting them in their circle of support right away. And then we talk about what to say or to somebody who's on the other side of the fence when they call them or come to see them. I have this new stuff for you to try. Don't worry, you don't even have to pay for it. Let's go to the bar. We're just going to have one drink. I just have this one job I want you to help with. Don't worry, you won't get into trouble. Just saying no doesn't work. We model, we role play what to say to somebody who's on the other side of the fence when they call or come to see you. Then we move people around. Some people will have their drug dealer in their circle of support. We have to get the drug dealer on the other side of the fence. Some people will have nobody in their circle of support. We have to have some people in their circle of support. So anytime you want to talk with somebody, you want to go to the movies, you want to hang out, you can call somebody in your circle of support. We write this down. We make copies of it. We give the person copies. And then so that keep a copy on your refrigerator, keep a copy with you. So when somebody calls you, you look before you respond, you look and see where they are. And if they're on the other side of the fence, you know exactly what to say. We practice that. And if they're in their circle of support, you know you can talk with them. And people have found it really, really useful to have this visual. So I just wanted to share that. And the last thing is that Bill would say the most important thing in anyone who worked with him was somebody who really cared, who liked him and liked his job and liked their job. And he could pick out in a hot second who really liked their work and liked working with him and who was in it just for a paycheck, as he would say. And he didn't have the time of day for somebody who was in it for a paycheck. We need to recognize that people with FASD and their families have great potential. And we need reminders when things aren't going well. We also want to remember that FASD, recognizing this and providing the right supports for people is literally can be a matter of life or death. So everything you do can save lives. And I thank each of you for listening this afternoon. I thank each of you for everything you do from every single day, because everything you do to support people, individuals and families, makes a world of difference. Whether you recognize it today or not, trust me, it makes a world of difference. And people take that with them in terms of how you feel about them and what you see as their positives. So thank you very much for that. And I will then turn it back over to Lindsay and Linda.
Thank you, Dan. There wasn't much in the chat in terms of questions that you didn't answer along the way, so I think
Oh,
we're
okay.
good.
Okay, I was just going to say the same thing. I think you covered the questions that were in there throughout. So I guess this brings us to the end of our presentation. And I guess on behalf of Contact Brant, Lindsay and myself, the support group, we wanted to thank Dan for sharing his story and your expertise on working with people with FASD. You provided us a lot of great information, and hopefully this will help shift our thinking, because I think that's a big part of it, is to really make that shift. I know I especially appreciate the focus on our responsibility as parents, caregivers, support workers on creating the environment for success instead of expecting that our kiddos can do it on their own. And that could be lifelong and ongoing, and we just need to have a good circle of support. So with that, I'll just end on a few reminders that the recording is going to be available on our YouTube website in the near future. Lindsay will send out a follow-up email when it's complete. And if you have any specific questions for either myself or Lindsay, our emails were in the chat. And again, thanks to Dan for joining us today, and for everyone far, near and far. There were some people out of the country that joined us, and that's lovely. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.
Yep. Have a great rest of the day. And thank you again.